Morning, everyone. Welcome to the Metro Unit Development Assessment Panel. Declare the meeting open at 9:31 and acknowledge that we're hosting this meeting on the traditional land of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. We acknowledge the Aboriginal people as the traditional custodians of Western Australia and pay respects to elders past and present and the ongoing connection between people, land, waters and community. The meeting will be run in accordance with the DAP Standing Orders 2024 under the Planning and Development Assessment Panel's Regulations 2011. This meeting is being recorded and live streamed on the DAP website in accordance with Regulation 42A of the Planning and Development Assessment Panel's Regulations 2011. Members are reminded to announce their name and title prior to speaking. Panel members may refer to technical devices throughout the meeting to assist them in considering the information before them. My name is Clayton Hyam and I'm the presiding member for today's meeting. With me I have Francesca Lafanti, the deputy presiding member, and John Simon, the specialist member. And online we have councillors Woodall and Lim from the City of Melville. And later on, for Part C, we'll have councillors Sullivan and Van Dawson from the City of Fremantle. There are no apologies, no members on leave of absence, and minutes from previous meetings are available on the DAP website. Moving to Part B for the City of Melville, I'm seeking a declaration of due consideration. Could all members please confirm that they've duly considered the matters in Part B? Raise of hands. Thank you very much. Disclosures of interest. Councillors, did this item go to a council meeting?
No, it did not.
No, I don't believe so.
Okay. Are there any disclosures of interest or declarations of interest? No? Okay, thank you very much. Move on to item 3, there's no Form 1. Form 2 we have before us is an extension of time to substantially commence development and various amendments to 4-storey mixed-use development in Wilcox Street, Ardross. We have one presenter, and that's Daniel Hollingworth. And just reminding Daniel that we've read the material and your presentation is limited to 3 minutes. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, panel. Daniel Hollingworth with Lateral Planning on behalf of the applicant for item 4.1. The fundamental question that's been raised by the city's RER is whether or not the modifications that are proposed through this application are properly characterised as an amendment for the purposes of Regulation 17(1)(c) of the DAP regs. You'll see from my deputation request a summary of what I describe as the core elements of the approved development, and they are that it is a 4-storey built form outcome that comprises office and residential land uses, screened back of house services and a plot ratio of approximately 1.6. And through the amendments that are proposed, all of those core elements are retained and not fundamentally altered. Building height is the same as what has been approved. The external appearance is a refinement of the previous approval. The land uses are retained, albeit in slightly different proportions. Parking and back of house services remain screened from public view, and the plot ratio has been reduced marginally. And in my view, those modest amendments don't work to substantially change the development approved and don't impact on what is the essence of that approval. I'm of the view that the introduction of the basement parking structure, which can't be seen from the public realm, doesn't impact plot ratio, does not impact building height, certainly doesn't have the effect of changing the core essence of the approval. As I've included in my deputation request, even a change which might be significant in some respects may not have the effect of substantially altering the approved development. And while I can accept and agree that the introduction of the basement level in some respects might not be insignificant, I don't believe that it has the effect of fundamentally impacting or changing the core essence of the approval that's already been granted. And equally, my view is that the reallocation of a portion of the approved office floor space to a residential land use does not alter the primary characteristics of the approval that's been granted. Introduction of the residential land use of the first floor retains the outward appearance of the approval. It maintains a passive surveillance outcome and the strong facade articulation that's already been incorporated through the approval. And again, I don't believe that this amendment of itself has the effect of materially or substantially altering the essence of the approval that's already been granted. So on that basis, I'm confident that the application is capable of consideration by the DAP as part of Regulation 17, and we'd welcome either of the two alternate recommendations provided by the city. We don't have a strong objection to the notion of a deferral to allow for more detailed consideration of the application against the planning framework, and whether or not that framework has substantially changed to alter what might be the outcome of a determination of the application. We've seen examples of similar applications within this same street, the same planning framework that have been considered by this panel recently. And we would welcome the opportunity to go down that path again if the panel determines that a more fulsome assessment by the city and the applicant would be warranted. So we'd welcome your questions and consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Questions from panel members? Yes, Fran.
Excuse me, my question, thank you for your presentation. My question is particularly in relation to the basement parking and fundamentally the changes to parking. Can you speak to the changes of the parking arrangement from that's approved to the application we have in front of us for part of Form 2 in the context of two matters? One, manoeuvring and manoeuvring on the site. Now, you have made some comments in your submission, and two, on the overall built form in terms of finished ground levels and boundary walls.
Thank you for your question. In the first part of the answer is the direction from the client to incorporate the basement structure is essentially to avoid the need of a parking stacker. The parking stackers, as I'm sure we're all aware, have a particular maintenance issue and a perception from the market. So our client doesn't want to implement a parking stacker is the frank answer that generated the introduction of the basement parking. And the need for the basement parking was reinforced essentially through the increase in the parking demand from the incorporation of the additional two multiple dwellings. The introduction of the basement parking, insofar as I'm aware, doesn't have an effect on the approved or proposed ground level. The sections within the development plans show now the thickness of the slab between the basement and the ground floor, which is, as I understand it, subterranean, whereas the original approval didn't show the thickness of that slab. So I'm not aware of any change that the introduction of the basement has on building height or boundary walls. In respect of manoeuvring, our client sought the advice of a civil engineer that analysed and provided swept path analysis of the circulation within the amended ground floor and basement to demonstrate that it's capable of operating efficiently.
Thank you. Further questions? Daniel, one of the requests was an extension of time. What's the applicant done to pursue the approval they already had?
It's a bit of a curious one. Our client is a family developer and they primarily build houses. Multiple dwellings isn't their forte, but they're starting to get into it. They have a database of existing clients that are looking to either relocate or stay within Ardros and broader Melville area. Over the last few years, they've been engaging with those landowners on their database, and there's been quite a strong interest from their clientele to purchase and move into one of these apartments. It's that age-old issue, and I know I'm running out of the excuse of COVID, but the issue is every single time that a client proposes to commit to a purchase, the building price moves slightly. So there hasn't been any formal marketing of the proposal, but there has been very strong engagement with their existing clientele and database. I'm instructed that as of the beginning of last year, they were in a position to commence condition clearances in a view to lodge a building permit. But again, there was a discrepancy between the purchase price and the realisation that they could achieve. And so it was put on hold. With construction prices starting to stabilise, they're much more confident in implementing the approval now.
Okay, thank you. Further questions?
Just to follow up, what's the time frame now?
I'm not certain. I know that they're very keen. So if the panel was inclined to grant an approval, I don't expect that there would be an expectation of a 4-year approval. But I can't speak to their specific timing. All I know is that they're keen to get on with clearing conditions as soon as possible.
Okay. Any more questions from panel members? No. Okay, thanks, Daniel. We'll move. Oh, sorry. Yes, Councillor Lim.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. Yeah, could you also, I guess, like enlighten me why the applicant or family developer decided not to resubmit as Form 1? Because I guess, like, performing an amendment such as this, you're sort of skipping, like public consultation. Yeah, it just seems like, yeah, there's a sense that I feel like it is quite a significant change, as advised by the city. I know the height, it does increase by at least 0.5 meter, and then you're increasing you're reducing one commercial area but increasing 2 residential dwellings in there. Yeah, is there a reason why they're not sort of open to, I guess, public consultation and decide to just perform it as an amendment? Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Councillor. Certainly it isn't the intention of our client to avoid the proper process or community consultation or design review. A Form 2 follows the same process in terms of a statutory assessment as a Form 1 would. So it is open to the city to advertise a Form 2 application and send it through design review. The city's RAR indicates that the application wasn't advertised because of their position that the application isn't properly characterised as an amendment. But if this panel decided that it was within the remit of the Regulation 17 amendment, that they would like a deferral for the purposes of community engagement and the design review panel consideration. So the view of the client was that while an application has been, an approval has been issued for the site for a development concept that in our view is manifestly consistent and shares the same essence, that the proper process is via Form 2. It certainly was, there was never an intention to avoid the process.
Good. Daniel,
Thank you.
90 days for deferral, how does that fit in with your client's timeframes? And
there's no objection to a 90-day deferral. I think based on the city's comments, it would be reasonable to allow for public consultation, design review, and a full assessment of the application against the R codes. Our client wouldn't resist that.
Okay, thank you. All right, then, being no further questions, we'll move to the officers. Are there questions of the officers? Yes. No. Yes, Councillor Lim.
Right. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I did note that the amendments don't appear to meet several, I guess, criteria, like the private open space, like size layout, solar parking, the list goes on. So I guess the question I'm trying to ask is because going through the Form 2 route, would that I guess cause unnecessary complications to the whole I guess like process? Because I guess there's a reason why you would suggest to not go through the route of Form 2 and go through the route of Form 1, so that these deemed to comply criteria will go through the proper process. I'm just trying to understand, by going, I guess, against the city's recommendation, would they would there be any future complications doing it this way? Thank you.
Through the chair, so Troy Capalucci, acting manager, City of Melville. So I guess through this process, I guess if it was today to be sort of be considered with the city's recommendation, that would be obviously okay, and then I'll have to lodge it as a DAP Form 1. If it was to be, as one of the recommendations, to be deferred, or alternate recommendation for deferral, then as part of that process, there will be consultation that will take place if it is going to be still dealt with still as a DAP Form 2. The only one we're advertising potentially won't occur if this alternate recommendation which has been put forward is if it is approved today. That's where technically no consultation will take place of those three options.
Further questions of the officers? Yes, Francesca.
Can you speak, thank you, can you speak a little bit further about the planning framework changes? I know your report refers to the R codes and it also refers to the Risley Activity Centre. I had a look at that Activity Centre document and there are a variety of elements in it that don't appear to be changed as a result of this development. Can you speak to the concerns you raised in relation to the framework changes, planning framework changes?
So yeah, in terms of the Risley Activity Centre structure plan, so that hasn't changed itself. However, some of the non-compliances with the amended design of the proposed mixed-use development now further infringe those requirements. So particularly the street setback of the fourth-storey apartment being changed from being 3 metres previously approved to 2 metres. And then in terms of the lot boundary setbacks or the boundary wall provisions in the Risley Activity Centre structure plan, so they require, or they allow for a nil setback up to 2 stories, but anything above that needs to be set back in accordance with the R codes. So that with some of the changes to the lot boundary setbacks and boundary walls that need further consideration under the Risley Activity Structure Centre plan. And then, in terms of the R codes, there's various other provisions in the new Part C that would require consideration.
Further questions? Where are we? Councillor Woodall.
Thank you, Chair. Just in relation to the city's recommendation for refusal and following on from Councillor Lim's question, materially, what would be the difference between refusing this and requiring effectively a Form 1, a new Form 1 to go in versus deferring this for 90 days and going through the Form 2 community consultation and design review panel process? Would there be any material difference between those two paths?
Through the chair, in regards to the process, probably not. The process will still be the same. It would be a full assessment will occur during both, either if it was lodged again as a Form 1 or during this deferral for 90 days as part of this Form 2 process. Just the normal full assessment, advertising, referral to our design review panel, etc. will sort of take place. The same process would both apply.
Thank you.
Okay, any further questions? Yes, Councillor Lim.
Hey, Mr. Chair. So just for clarity, let's say if the alternate motion was to be accepted, would there be public consultation after that?
Sorry, for which motion?
The motion to accept for deferral.
Yes, if there would be a deferral, then the city would, after it completes its full assessment, then conduct advertising consultation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, no further questions. Thanks, gentlemen. We'll move on. We have an item before us with a recommendation for refusal. I'm going to seek a mover and a seconder for the refusal. Is there a mover for that? Councillor Lim. Okay, thank you. Is there a seconder for refusal?
I'm happy to second it for the purposes of debate.
Thank you, Councillor Woodall. Councillor Lim, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I won't speak too much about it. I just think that the city has good intentions to do the community for asking the applicant to not put through this as an amendment because there is a perception that that you're sort of giving to future developers that I in my personal opinion, I think that the change is quite substantial. It's changing, the ratios of a commercial property to more of a residential property. So I feel that there's good reasons to resubmit it as a Form 1, just so that you're letting the public know that this is indeed a significant enough change. You're not just changing sort of the I guess how a certain form looks and whatnot. This is actually changing the use of the site. It's not I guess like the open areas, the parking, how it visually looks is all substantially different. So I just think that it's wise for the applicant to submit it as a Form 1. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Woodall.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I think whether this is a substantial modification probably can be argued either way, and the sort of case law, I guess, isn't entirely clear because it depends, I guess, on the facts and circumstances of each case. So, on balance, I lean towards the city officer's position, which is that this is substantial. However, I also acknowledge that in effect, whether it's a Form 1 or a Form 2, which is deferred to go through those processes, the outcome's probably going to be the same. But on balance, I lean towards the city officer's recommendation. I do think that sort of over time, I have seen the Form 2 sort of definition, if you like, I guess, expand or seem to expand to cover more and more significant modifications, which I'm not sure is necessarily a positive thing or how it was originally intended. And I'm also mindful of the fact that not that I necessarily think it has happened here, but the situation where a Form 1 is lodged and then an applicant or a developer later sort of lodges a Form 2 with incremental changes to sort of, I guess, try and avoid or minimise the opposition that might come if they had put all those changes in the original Form 1 application. So for that reason, I support the city officer's recommendation, but I do acknowledge that it probably is a line ball sort of decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Further speakers, John.
Look, I think a couple of things. First of all, I think it definitely is a Form 2, I'm sorry. The changes here are of the nature that we've approved as Form 2s on other not dissimilar projects many times. So I think the changes are not substantial enough for it not to be a Form 2. I also think that the planning framework hasn't changed sufficiently for us not to be able to approve this as is. I do accept the argument of the applicant that we're still in long COVID. I think that's for the work I've been doing recently. There's no question that we might be nearing the end of that, but we still, in the construction area, we've still been looking at long COVID effects, if you like. As we say, it's settling down now, but it's taken a long time to do. So I am not inclined to refuse this. I am rather inclined to approve it as is, and to allow everybody to get on with it. I can't see any point in spending unnecessarily time and money for everybody for an outcome which is probably going to be what we're seeing in front of us now. So for that reason, I think we should enable the applicant to go ahead and just start building.
Thank you, John. Further speakers? Francesca.
Thank you. I disagree with the recommendation on the table. As far as I'm concerned, the proposal has satisfied DAP Regulation 17, and I don't consider the information that we have got here to be a substantial change. and therefore I do consider it as appropriate from a jurisdictional question to be considered as a Form 2 application. I do note the concerns that have been raised, and I accept the applicant's position that a Form 2 application does not alter the opportunity for a full and thorough planning assessment to be undertaken, including consultation, and so I don't see this as a suggestion in any way, shape or form from the applicant to bypass any of the planning framework. So from my perspective on the position of jurisdiction, I am comfortable it is appropriately classified as a Form 2. I don't think there are necessarily major substantial changes. However, I am comfortable probably more with deferral and getting a planning assessment undertaken. There are some changes. I am interested to see how significant they really are in the context of it. My initial review of it was that it seemed very similar, both in streetscape interaction, rear lane interaction. The land uses as per the planning framework are consistent with the Risley Activity Centre. And having been out on site, it seems quite similar to what is actually happening in terms of the new development in that area. However, I am comfortable that in the absence of a full assessment that there may be matters that I am unaware of in the context of this development, and therefore would support a deferral, but I don't support the motion on the table.
Thank you. I too don't support the motion to refuse. In my mind, I have no doubt that this is a Form 2 in that the changes are not substantial in town planning terms in the context of this development, and I would support it as a Form 2. Now, my initial thoughts were to go down the path of supporting an approval today, but having heard from the applicant, and in fact the applicant is quite comfortable with it being deferred for further review of the application, I'd be happy to support the deferral recommendation. So back to you, Councillor Lim, to wind up the debate.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess, yeah, there's not really much to, yeah, like I do acknowledge that, I guess it's just how you, it really comes to how you see it, whether it's a substantial change or not. And I can, yeah, like I agree with a lot of the points that was raised, around that what one would see that, okay, the height is not changing as much. There's sort of yeah, many reasons to see why this could be an amendment. Yeah, but I just think that the line gets blurry almost every time you know, a Form 2 gets submitted. Like over time, the amendments does sort of get more and more substantial. So for that, yeah, I just can't agree with this being put through as an amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lim. That ends the debate on that motion. I'm now going to put the motion for refusal. All in favour? Against? It's lost. We'll move to an alternate motion.
I'd like to give an alternate motion, if I may.
Yes.
My alternate motion is that we have the language provided to us in our section R13 request. It is a deferral. I'm using the language that's contained in that, which is that we accept the application by reference as an appropriate for consideration as a mixed-use development and is compatible with the objectives of the zoning table in accordance with clause 16 of the Melville Local Planning Scheme number 6, and defer the application and the accompanying plans for a period of up to, if I can add those language in there, up to 90 days. The comment that's been raised here is concerned that up to 90 days might be a bit short. I'm comfortable with up to 120 days, noting that the reason for that number, particularly for the applicant, is that that any deferral will require a determination to be made by this panel, and that there can be no extension of that time in the absence of a matter being brought back to this panel. I would anticipate, and that timeframe includes the timeframe that it needs to be with MIDAP for its secretarial actions. So I'm comfortable for up to a period of 120 days. That doesn't prevent it from being referred back to us on completion of that earlier, to enable the advertising to be completed and for a comprehensive assessment contained against volume 1 of the R codes, as well as the remaining planning framework. So I have slightly changed it from just what's worded.
Okay, is there a seconder for that? Yes, Councillor Woodall, thank you. I'm not going to treat it as a procedural motion. I'm going to treat it as an ordinary motion,
Yes.
because it's an alternate motion. So, Francesca, did you want to speak to that anymore?
I've already made the bulk of my comments earlier on.
Councillor Woodall.
Oh yeah, just very briefly, I think this will allow a full assessment that essentially would be the same as if it had been originally submitted as a Form 1. I think it is important that the design review panel does have a look at it just to see if there are, any improvements that potentially could be made, and also just going through the public consultation will just ensure that there's confidence in the planning framework and that, there's nothing untoward happening. So for that reasons, I support this motion. Thank you.
Further speakers? Sean.
Look, I'd much prefer this was actually an approval. If the panel is minded to run this way, then I think it's the next best thing. I do think, though, we're going to end up in the same place that we are now. I doubt that there's going to be any substantial changes to what we've got on the table, and to that extent, there's a level of inefficiency, if you like, generally. But this is the next best thing to what I'd prefer, I think.
Okay, thanks, John. Further speakers? Councillor Lim? No? Look, I support it, although I have some concerns about the extension to 120 days. I hope, for the sake of the applicant, that the officers don't take that whole period. I'd like to think they've suggested up to 90 days that they can deal with it within that time frame. So back to you, Francesca, to wind up the debate. No further. All right, I'll put the recommendation to defer. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Thank you to Councillors Lim and Woodall for your attendance, and to the city officers. Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.
I'm just going to seek a procedural motion to defer, or not defer, to adjourn for 5 minutes. Francesca and John, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, right, we will recommence the meeting. Good morning, everyone. And for those new ones, welcome to the Metro Development Assessment Panel meeting this morning. Welcome councillors and Andrew Sullivan and Ingrid Van Dawson, City of Fremantle. Just to go and confirm that we've considered all the documentation within Part C and related information. Part C, can I have a declaration of due consideration by show of hands? Thank you. Thank you. Disclosures of interest. I've got one already posted here from Councillor Van Dawson, an impartiality interest, which is set prior to the council meeting for both applications, and approves employed planning solutions.
Sorry, I haven't put mine in, so I also have the same.
Thank you, councillor. Okay.
With the paperwork.
So when you can participate, I'll agree to that, and I'll seek a declaration of any additional interest from panel members. Are there any? No? Okay, thank you very much. Move to the presentation. Now, presentations are limited to 3 minutes, and I'm going to be fairly strict on that today, except I've agreed that Stacey Town can get an extension to 5 minutes. So, and I believe, Simon, you need to get away to something else, so
I'll
suggest
stay until Kate finishes her presentation.
Oh, okay. So are we going in the order of Kate first?
No, I think we want to go
Simon, okay. Simon, I will stick you to 3 minutes.
Okay, can I hand these out first?
Oh,
There's
no,
always
no.
Oh, it's the same. It's the printout of the presentation.
Well, we've all read the
Okay.
presentation.
It's just
Thank
that
you.
you can see the photos
Thank
right
you.
in front of you.
Thank you.
If anyone wants to disagree with them, we'll put them there.
No.
Right there, Stacey.
Sorry.
Okay, I act for Steve and Kate, who live at Unit F, 49A Pakenham Street, which is directly to the south of the development site. I just want to make a couple of key points. First one is that their property strata titled and it has a heritage listed wall. There's no opportunity for them to redevelop their site in the future. So therefore the impacts of this development have to be internalised. They can't be addressed by the neighbours. I've got some photos in the handout, but hopefully you've all seen them showing their property. They have a very narrow courtyard. It's probably about that wide. That's their only source of light. And the access to daylight, sunlight is the key issue. I have a plan showing their end of the street, and existing buildings are 1 to 3 stories. The developers have argued that a property up the road, D&J Fowler building, which was 3 stories, but the equivalent of 5. Incidentally, I used to live there and got the approval for conversion, but that's down the other end of the street. The immediate context is 1 to 3 story existing buildings. And so the development should be looked at in that context. Okay, let's talk about height limits in the council's town planning scheme. It says 2 to 4 stories, not 5 stories. 2 to 4 stories. If it goes over 2 stories, you need to satisfy certain criteria. There's 4 criteria. The most important one for my clients is the second one, which talks about amenity and the impacts on adjoining neighbours. So that's essential to my clients' concerns. Okay, let's look at amenity. Amenity in this case is access to sunlight, overtowering, overshadowing. My clients have a small unit, and they only have a small sliver of sunlight coming into their property. They will lose all of that if this development isn't modified. Attached to my presentation, there was actually some couple of cross sections showing that is the case. Okay, let's look at some key considerations. First of all, there's the deemed provisions, which require a whole lot of things, amenity,
Simon,
access.
that's 3 minutes. Thank you.
Gee, that was quick.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that was the key point.
Okay, are there any questions of Simon?
Presiding member, I was just going to ask, you would have read the applicant's, I guess, response, fairly detailed response. Is there anything in that response that you specifically challenge, or I guess their response is essentially trying to compare a 3-story, perhaps as of right, structure versus their configuration?
I think it's that height issue that if you and I, and we're all design professionals, if we were looking at the site, you start with looking at the site and the surrounds and the constraints, and then the design evolves from that, rather than just come in and maximise development. So I think that's sort of been the starting point. What can we get out of this site, and how can we possibly justify the extra height? I think it's been done around the wrong way, and we're automatically in this conflict situation where we're trying to grapple with this design that actually doesn't address the issues related to the site. So.
And if I could ask a question, I appreciate that this question is a little bit about building matters, but it's about the heritage limestone wall. Is my understanding correct that where unit F and E are, that the boundary wall, the limestone wall, was part of the original shed, if you like, or structure? Do you have any understanding about where the footings are of that and what the implications would be of digging down right next to it?
No, I haven't. I only was asked to look at this. Right. I looked at it on Monday, so it's been a bit hurried. I have this.
Perhaps Kate might be able to answer it when she does her presentation. Thank you.
Right. Any further questions of Simon? Yes, Francesca.
Thank you. My questions relate to the presentation and to the submission provided by the applicant. The view studies deal with and speak to 49F Pakenham Street. Do you have any comments on behalf of your client in relation to those studies that were performed? And I suppose I've got 2 questions. One, do you have any comment about whether you agree that they're a true representation of the material? I have the same comment to the applicant as well, and the officers. And 2, do you have any comments in relation to the impact?
Okay, yes, my 2 cross sections do show that the direct access to sunlight, daylight, will be obliterated. So, and yeah, I've looked at the thing. I'm not the view lines. Don't think they're that accurate. I just took some photos. They're attached, and it clearly shows that it's pretty narrow. It's about that wide. That's the only bit of sunlight they get in. It will be obliterated.
Is it sunlight or light?
Oh well, it's direct sunlight. So June. There will be daylight, but direct sunlight will be totally lost.
Okay, thank you. Further questions? No, thank you, Simon. We'll move on to Kate. Kate, you've got 3 minutes.
Thank you. Before that 3 minutes, I just want to say, please, that I'm not very good at doing this, and I've, to get this short 7 days notice for a layperson who's got other obligations is really hard. So I'm feeling that I'm up against it.
Sure.
Okay. And I also have never done this, so I will do my best. I press a button. Okay. So I'm going back to the very similar points that have been raised. It's not just that access to sunlight is so simple. It's a resource, and it's an increasing resource because, as it says here, it's going to go on my panels and provide me with utilities that I need. Taking my sunlight away is going to cost me, and they are going to benefit from that, and I am going to lose. It also affects a healthy living condition. The cooler and less light you have, it's going to be cold, damp. I'm getting old. I'm going to be facing some of those issues. One of the other things I would like to say is I feel that the drawings are grossly inaccurate. I possibly didn't make my point more strongly before, but there is nothing can be done about my heritage wall, and the building is right up against it. They have done drawings that represent the existing building with a pitched roof. That is not the case. It is a flattish roof with a little set for windows and aeration to the northeast. I can look out at the moment right across and see the sky and see the buildings and my surroundings. That building is going to be a wall right up against me. So I do feel that I'm going to be impacted very strongly. And so we're talking again about amenity, just my right as a person to have my views. I did what a lot of people haven't done in the past. I lived in a three-bedroomed house. I made a decision 30 years ago to downsize and live in a small apartment because I thought that was fair to our community. And I know that my building cannot be changed. It is part of a heritage block. They're trying to suggest that there could be more overshadowing, and that is based on this premise that the building that exists now has a pitched roof, which it does not. So there is so much that is not actually accurate and representative of what I have now and what will be if that build goes ahead. I didn't do my starter. How long have I got?
20 seconds.
20 seconds, okay. I just want to reiterate the concern for the heritage. My wall is not heritage listed. It is adjoined to a heritage building though. We share that boundary wall, and the whole of the area I occupy with my 6 neighbours goes back to the 1870s. I pointed this out last time, and I believe very strongly in preserving that and being more sensitive than having a 5-storey building.
Okay, thank you, Kate. Are there questions of Kate?
Well, I will ask that question again about the limestone wall. Is your understanding that the footings are not very deep and
my understanding, thank you, Andrew, is that I wouldn't know if there were many footings, whatever footings are. It's an extremely fragile wall. I don't think that there is anything has been done in the past to help preserve it. It was built 150 years ago. That's not how they built. It is a fragile wall of dry rubble, and it just has a render on it. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew.
Further questions? No, okay, thank you, Kate. Thank you, Simon. Move on to Stacey. Stacey, I've agreed to 5 minutes.
Appreciated, thank you. Actually, can Mum go first? We'll come up together. And
yes, come up together.
Is that okay?
She can go first. Thank you.
Let me go first. Yeah. Okay. Pamela Catalini, 22, Pakenham. My unit's 22 in Pakenham Street. Want me to start now?
Yes, please.
No matter how this application is assessed, the scheme says that height addition is 3 stories should not affect the amenities of adjoining properties. When I bought my property, I expected that it would be reasonable and likely for a 3-story building to be built next door sometime in the future, and that I would lose some of my views. What I did not expect was a 5-story building being built so close to my main balcony and up to my windows of my living space, blocking out my light, my breezes, and creating a sense of being enclosed and isolated. How can the applicant say that I would be only slightly more impacted by a 4-story building than a 3-story one, and that a further 5-story would not be worse than the 4-story? That's ridiculous. This is not a news flash. My amenity will be grossly affected by a solid wall on the boundary. My living space, indoor and outdoor, will be substantially impacted and put into darkness. The applicant says the light and air can find its way down small voids. Surely this would be reduced to a minuscule amount by a 4-story building, but it would be reduced even further by 5 stories. How can it be said that this is the only marginally of difference to a 3-story building? The applicant seems to think that I am exaggerating and that I should be grateful that I still have a second balcony. I think my second balcony has been photoshopped in the applicant's addition information, as it shows an outdoor setting, which is not mine. This space is not large enough for entertainment, and the seating is placed in the photograph right near the clothesline. This balcony does not function for outdoor living. It comprises of a walkway to an area where the clothesline, water heater, and air conditioning are located. In any event, this second balcony would also be restricted by the 5-story building views and would be blocked to the east, only allowing for some outlook to the south and the southwest. Also, this balcony can only be accessed by 2 bedrooms and is located at the furthest end from the main living space. For me to see sky or have any outlook, I would need to walk outside to hang the washing. To correct some of the mistakes, I do get a view of the street from the kitchen window at the side. And contrary to the claim, I do get sunlight into my kitchen every morning early, which is very beautiful. And this will be obliterated. Can I respectfully ask this question? If the situation was reversed and I applied to build a 5-story wall on the boundary, would this pass the planning and building light and ventilation requirements for my apartment?
Thank you, Pamela. We'll just move. We'll ask questions together, shall we, afterwards, or do you want me to
that's
seek
fine.
questions first?
Is the clicker still over there at all? Does Kate still have it?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you. In relation to additional height, the DAP must be certain that the design process has been robust. Would the design review panel be satisfied with this proposal if they were to see this latest information? And have you been given all the required information and assessment advice for this proposal? And using discretion for a 4th and 5th story as proposed, are you certain of the planning framework requirements and how they can be varied? And can a 5th story be approved? Have all the criteria been satisfied without doubt? Are there clear and reasonable reasons for departing from the scheme? Have all submissions been duly considered and addressed? And is what being recommended being given genuine consideration? My mother's already spoken to the next few slides. For this one, you can see that the view from,
There's 2 windows there. There's another one not listed.
Did I just go 2 slides then? Okay, sorry. For this one, you can see that the view from the back balcony is also affected by the new building, which restricts views to the east. In any event, as mentioned by Mum, this is a view from the clothesline air conditioning unit and the hot water system. The applicant shows in this slide how a 4 and or 5-story building will block out the window to the living area. But what the applicant fails to show is the effect of a 3-story building, which would have quite a less impact. Sorry. Sorry about that. The applicant shows in this slide how a 3, 4 and 5-story building affects the front balcony. As you can see, 3 stories is far better scenario for unit 22. This 3-story view is more like what was expected by the owner of unit 22. Whilst unit 22 does not have access to direct sunlight, it has access to ambient light, which is better than access to no or little light at all. In addition, the purpose of a window is to allow for airflow and ventilation and have an outlook to the outside world. The next couple of slides, I just want to point out that level 3 is actually the 4th story, and level 5 is actually, and level 4 is actually the 5th story. This is the table provided by the applicant. Clause 131 only allows for consideration of 1 story in addition to 3 stories. As this is a 5-story proposal, the application cannot comply with this clause. Even if the applicant reduced the proposal to 4 stories, all 4 criteria of clause 1.2 would need to be addressed. One of these criteria relates to amenity of adjoining properties. It's clear that the amenity of a number of adjoining properties would be adversely affected by the 4th story as proposed. Therefore, even a 4-story proposal would be unlikely to satisfy the requirements of clause 131. Then let's consider clause 4.8. All 4 criteria plus other requirements would need to be satisfactorily addressed to allow additional height. One of these criteria relates to amenity of adjoining properties. Once again, it is clear that amenity of a number of adjoining properties would be adversely affected by the 5th story as proposed. In fact, the impacts of the 4th story would be exacerbated by the 5th story. However, I'm concerned that there's no provision in the scheme to allow a 5th story on this property. Clause 131 only allows consideration of 1 additional story to 3 stories to a certain height limit. Clause 4.8 allows consideration of additional height. However, it does not mention additional stories. The applicant does not provide an assessment of amenity under clause 131. Here, this merely includes a number of statements which are disputed. Amenity impacts on Unit 22 could be reduced by a 3-story building and or meaningful side setbacks to the higher stories. The applicant argues that a 4-story building as proposed would be acceptable, that would have little more impact than a 3-story building with a 33-degree pitched roof, and that a 5th-story building would have negligible further impact than a 4th story. It is my opinion that a 4th story could not be supported as proposed, as it can't satisfy all the 4 criteria of clause 131. A 4th story as proposed would impact Unit 22 significantly more than a 3-story building.
It's 5 minutes.
To then say that a 5-story building would cause no further impact is beyond comprehension. The rationale being put forward seems to be that Unit 22 is going to be adversely affected whatever happens, so bad luck. Any additional adverse impact is not going to make any difference. I don't think this reflects good and proper planning, and I trust that the DAP members feel the same way.
Thanks, Stacey. Other questions of either Stacey or yes,
Thank you, presiding member. Stacey, one of your elements in the submission was that the scheme says you can go to 4 stories, but even if you can have additional height, you can't go to 5 stories. Is that, can you just re-explain that positioning?
I guess I'm looking at the technical wording of the scheme. The scheme, clause 131 talks about going 1 additional story to 3. It says you can consider
to 4.
Sorry,
yeah.
3 to 4. It says a story, end story, 1. And it gives
So
a height.
You're arguing that the scheme simply doesn't allow anything more than
possibly
4 numbered stories,
correct,
irrespective of the height that might be
Adjustable.
adjusted through the other criteria. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
further questions? No, thank you very much, both of you. On to Ben Doyle.
Thank you. Thanks, panel members. I'm Ben Doyle, joined by Joshua Carmody from our office and Felipe Soto, the project architect. When this was previously considered just under 2 months ago, it was resolved to defer to seek further information and plans to address 4 matters. 1, the impact on the adjoining sites at 45 and 49A Pakenham Street against the provisions of LPS 4. being clause 4.811 and schedule 7. 2, the extent of variation discretion sought on the site, inclusive of plans showing impact. 3, local context and character of the built form, and then 4, any associated modifications to address impacts. Now, those first 3 items are interrelated, and I rewatched the April meeting and checked my notes, and the discussion that led to those points was a desire to thoroughly interrogate the statutory framework and decision-making process for the exercise of discretion in relation to building height, and to undertake an assessment of the impacts at 45 and 49A in accordance with those statutory provisions. Now, we've carried out that analysis, and it's very detailed and comprehensive. It's contained in attachments 20 and 21 of your agenda. We've set it out in a way that I hope is clear and straightforward as possible. There is a fair bit there. And the addendum to the RAR confirms that the city's officers concur with our methodology and our conclusions. Now, there's nothing less interesting than town planners reciting scheme clauses in a deputation, so I'm going to trust that you've read those materials and understood them, but we'd be happy to answer any questions or provide any clarification you may require. Essentially, contrary to what was just claimed, Schedule 7 has the effect that all development is discretionary, with the same criteria applying to consideration of any building from 1 to 4 stories. Level 5 is a variation to the height limit considered against the criteria in clause 4.8.1. It does not limit the consideration of additional stories. Now, point 3 of the deferral was intended to understand the response to the surrounding context. Felipe and his team have done that extensively. And again, contrary to what was claimed, that has been done right from the beginning with detailed site analysis on the ground. And that was presented to the DRP because that was understandably a considerable issue for their concern. What is clear is that the discretion does exist to grant approval for this development. And the question then is whether the amenity impacts of the variation are acceptable and whether impacts would be mitigated by side setbacks to the upper levels. Now, we believe our detailed analysis demonstrates that some level of impact is to be reasonably expected in a compact urban environment such as this. But the variations we are proposing do not materially increase those impacts to the detriment of surrounding properties. It's a high quality design that replaces an existing, we must remember, out of character, intrusive element in a prominent location.
3 minutes.
Okay, can I just wind up? Thank you. Look, the reintroduction of residences into the West End has introduced diverse living arrangements. Conversion of former industrial buildings, barns, stables creates unorthodox dwelling types, as we've seen. Sunken courtyards, mezzanines, apartments, interior of complexes, improvised openings. Sounds and smells of cafes and shops as well, and people going about their business. It's what makes it interesting and eclectic, and it makes interesting housing. It is a feature, not a bug, of this area. The design has come from a detailed analysis of this surrounding context. There's some detail that we've got in slides that we'd be happy to walk you through because I expect there'll be questions. This is supported by the officers, it's supported by the design review panel, it's supported by the Heritage Council. We hope it'll be supported by the panel today. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Questions of Ben or the other presenters with him?
Are you the only presenter or?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. A couple of questions. The first one, you would have heard me talk about the limestone wall, and I do appreciate that that is, for the most part, a building issue. But I feel that we would need to be satisfied that something is doable. The limestone wall would presumably have limited below ground footings, would be my assessment, having dealt with similar buildings in the West End. What is the strategy in terms of excavation right next to the limestone wall of 49AF?
Sure. As a new town planner, I'm going to hand that one to Felipe.
Yeah, I think we are not going that much below the existing sort of limestone wall. I think we are just trying to mitigate there is a provision within the planning scheme that limits the base of the 3-story sort of building. I think we are trying just to massage the levels as much as we can to allow that additional height just to increase our parking. But the level difference is not going to be like we are excavating a basement next to the limestone sort of wall. And I think the strategies from the construction perspective we put in place to the satisfaction of the city of Fremantle to ensure that no damage is caused during the construction and after the construction to the wall.
So just to build on that, sorry, at the last that meeting, you'll recall there was a deputation about underground storage tanks that may or may not be present there. And our response to that has been through DMERS and through this process as well, is that there will inevitably need to be detailed analysis of the site conditions prior to site works occurring. We will need to know what we're dealing with there, and that will include the limestone wall and underground tanks.
Thank you. I had a look at the parking arrangement, and it would seem to me that there is sufficient space from side to side that if those car stackers need to be moved a fraction off the boundary, that there would still be more than enough room to be able to do that. I just want to get an understanding, would that be your assessment as well? There seems to be more than adequate width. I mean, the site's wider than 12, significantly wider than 12 metres. So
you would expect so, Felipe?
Yeah, that is a reasonable assumption.
So can I be satisfied to a degree that that is something that can be handled adequately from your perspective during your building process?
Based on the advice we have, we're confident that that's the case. Yes.
Any questions? Yeah, sorry.
The question, as you rightly stated, one of the main reasons for the deferral was, I guess, about whether the 5-storey parapets were an acceptable form and whether they, in fact, should be staggered or there should be staggering of form as part of the scheme requirement. You're arguing that there isn't, and that's fine. You're entitled to do that. The presentation suggests that the southern-facing boundary wall can be adequately, I guess, articulated visually through murals. I guess what I want to ask is, how do we lock something like that in at the planning stage? Are there other methodologies for dealing with that other than just a mural? So I'm not absolutely convinced, and I want to hear what the options are. It feels like a very blank brown wall.
I might just give a little bit of history before we bench up on that one. Actually, though, if you guys went through the DRP minutes from the last meeting, that was a specific request from the design review panel. They got a heritage architect on board as part of that sort of panel, who raised that as part of that design sort of review last meeting, in the third one, as an opportunity on a campus for our work, which is quite traditional in the streets of Fremantle. And that's something that we committed to, and that probably we were not as clear as we should have been as part of that final sort of DA submission. But that was clear that that is the intent. And I think if the city requires us to go back and just be part of the process or engage with them for the final outcome of that sort of our mural that we are proposing, we'll be happy to do that.
There is a condition that requires the treatment of that southern elevation to be to the satisfaction of the city. I guess we're open to modifications to the wording if you wanted more certainty around that.
I guess I would say I'm probably more sceptical than most about murals, and I think that there are quite often other ways of treating a wall that provides interest rather than simply allowing someone to paint on it. And we would be very much open to a condition that requires treatment in form of materials, finishes,
texture,
surfaces that mitigates those impacts.
The last one is issues of overlooking from those units that look down towards 49 and particularly 49A E&F. Whether in fact there should be a requirement for some screening that at least directs views away from looking straight down into that. Have you looked into that?
Yes, we have, and in fact we've included an indication that it would be feasible to widen the planter boxes around those balconies.
I'm thinking more of the bedrooms of the front units, so the back bedrooms of the front units, and also the units which are the rear units that are on that southern boundary. Whether they actually look essentially directly down into particularly the higher level units of the front facing units, and because they're above 49 in a sense, and in fact they potentially look into the outdoor courtyard, the roof terrace at 49, but they would also have the potential to look down perhaps less so those ones into 49F, but the rear units, the rear windows of the rear unit on the southern boundary presumably would be able to look straight down into 49F.
Yeah.
So we are
sorry, Councillor, just to be specific. So we are talking about these bedrooms in here.
Primarily the ones on the southern, so the
So we're talking about this one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, at the moment, what we have done for those units, the one sitting on what will be level 1, we have increased the section of those sort of planter boxes to avoid people getting to the edge. And I think our sections demonstrate that you won't be able, just using the corner vision, to be able to look down to those adjacent sort of properties. When we're looking at the ones above, we'll be happy to consider some additional screening that allows to mitigate any overlooking for that sort of southwestern sort of unit, if that is the requirement. If that's necessary.
So you would be happy with the condition that would require the assessment of that to be compliant in terms of overlooking?
We'd accept it, but yet,
I mean, obviously there are many ways of dealing with it. But
yeah, look, I mean, if that's the barrier between approval and not, then I think we would probably take that. Looking at the layout of the bedroom, I think you would need to be standing in the top corner and peering out to have a look down at those neighbouring courtyards. Now, someone might do that. I mean, they might stand on a box to look out a highlight window as well. But I guess the intent of the R codes, as I would see it, is to prevent persistent intrusive overlooking, not occasional glimpses of your neighbours. So in my view, I would suggest that with the nib to the wall there, the location of the window, the angle of view, the presence of the planter, the various mitigating impacts, I would think that the overlooking from those bedrooms would be very occasional and very insignificant. But if it's necessary, in your view, to screen that window, it is, I expect, something that we could do in some way.
Further questions?
I have a question to your material. The documents tell us that there were no new plans, floor plan submitted. Is that correct?
Correct.
On your view studies 3 I'm looking at view number at page 4. Not the electronic number, but number page 4 on your view studies. And it shows the front, the street-facing balcony of the adjoining property in Pakenham Street, which shows on this material there is a 3-storey with roof, a 5-storey on parapet, and a 5-storey with side setbacks. Can you speak to those in the context of the concerns raised and were spoken about today in relation to your design? Excuse me.
I'm happy to speak to that. Yeah, I mean, primarily the concerns that were raised at the last meeting was the obstruction of views of the street. I think the emphasis in today's deputation has shifted to the sky, but what we represented here is the fact that a 3-storey building clearly does obstruct all views of the street. In our view, maximising on a view of the sky was not the original concern that was expressed last time. It was views of the street.
So in this context, how do you say the proposal satisfies the provisions of the scheme in relation to amenity? And I'm looking at this and I note there is a rear balcony, but I note from the plans that we have been provided, and it's not been contended by the neighbour, that the layout of that adjoining property has the living spaces toward the balcony that I'm referring about.
Our argument for how it satisfies it is that amenity takes into consideration the future expected outcomes. This was an apartment that was designed with it. If you look at the photo that we've provided there, the outlook is of a roof, not of a street. That's the prevailing outlook from that apartment. It was designed to achieve daylighting from multiple points, from a light well, from a front balcony, from a rear balcony. So we are not impacting those the daylighting and the solar access, and we're arguing that an outlook or a view is not necessarily part of the expected amenity of this property based on it being located interior to the apartment complex.
So on this plan that I'm looking at, your development constitutes, we've got the top one, which says, from what I've heard you just speak about today, that is the future expected outcome as set in the planning framework. The information we have in front of us is you're seeking a variation, a discretion, and you're saying, and I've heard today, that the impact is no greater than the existing. So what are you saying of the bottom two?
Sorry, to be clear, because of space constraints, we haven't shown a 4-story because it was implied in the bottom image where you can see where the level of the 4th story would be. But we're not saying that the 3-story is as of right or 4-story. We're saying that it allows up to 4 stories. That's the accepted or the expected amenity impact of 4-story building. But given the discussions we've shown, even a 3-story with a roof would have approximately the same impact as a 4-story building.
Could you clarify that further? Because I don't disagree with your point about 3-story, and I'm not necessarily disputing your picture at 3-story with roof. I have some questions about your bottom two pictures, which show the level of the development against the top picture. So can you speak to the specific question relates to the amenity impact of your development, because you are the development form at those upper levels. So I'm not really having a particular question around the levels that we're talking about at the 3 and roof, as the language you've talked about of future expected outcomes. I'm more interested in that you're seeking from us variations, and there was a lot of discussion, particularly on that adjoining property, about impact of it. So can you speak to why you say these amenity impacts? I'm not following your train, that these amenity impacts are no different.
And sort of just on that, I'm assuming that you're saying that the bottom image is your development. Is that right?
The one in the middle.
The one in the middle is
The
your
one in the
development.
middle, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, Joe, the bottom one.
No,
The one in the- Can I just jump in just from the
Which one?
design
Sorry,
perspective?
Sorry, hang on, let's just one question at a time, and then
Which of these images are we to take as being your proposal?
The middle one. The middle
The
one.
middle one.
Yeah.
Thank you.
so answer to Francesca's
So
question.
my question then is still stands in relation to the plan at the top, which you've expressed as being an expected outcome, versus the plan that you are proposing that you say doesn't impact amenity.
What we're demonstrating is the objections here are in relation to views across the development site. So they are views that are achieved over our client site. Various discussions around what the appropriate development form should be were had at the previous meeting. I guess what we're demonstrating is, under a number of scenarios and reasonable ones, there should be no expectation of achieving views of the street across our client's property, given that the apartment in question is located behind a building and a roof on their own property.
So I would agree with a comment about no expectation about view of the street. This plan is not none of these plans are view of street. These are view of essentially sky.
Open space.
Correct. So this
is your argument predicated on the plan is acceptable? Is that you've been analysing this, based on the street view? Is that what you're saying to us today?
Yeah, so the photo that we were referencing from this vantage point was provided by Ms. Catalini in her previous submission. And the argument at the time was, from my balcony, this development will obstruct views of the street.
So this is about a view to a street.
From
what do you say about the comments that we've received in the submissions about light and open nature of the
sunlight?
And sunlight. Sorry, I'm dominating the question.
In that regard, the roof that is in front of the view from this balcony, we need to recall this is a pitched roof. So that recedes away from this balcony. So from this vantage point, you as you take steps forward, that roof doesn't feel like it's getting closer. It actually opens up the sky further as you step forward. So I would expect that there is going to be, well, clearly there will be daylight coming through and sunlight coming through into that space from that direction, from the east.
Thank you. And my final, sorry, did you want to add more?
Just looking at the existing sort of configuration of that apartment, we are discussing a balcony space that is sort of configured around a courtyard space. So courtyard space is expected just one frontage, because at the end of the day, a building is going to get developed next door. And what those diagrams are sort of presenting, addressing the first initial sort of comment about the view to the street, but also if you look at the sort of shadow and the light that they're getting across the three different examples, it's just consistent. And the advantage of that is the roof that just been explained about being a pitch roof, allowing that sort of eastern sun to come through in the morning. So the solar access and sunlight outcome is consistent in the sense that the reality is that this boundary will be the south-facing boundary of that apartment. It's not the northern sort of boundary of that apartment. So in terms of the solar access in the morning from the eastern sun, is coming as a consistent sort of outcome, as an advantage just from the pitch roof that we got existing there. So if we look at that image in the middle, slightly up in the middle, when we are looking from, I would assume that is the dining area, looking back to the east, the existence of what we are doing next door doesn't really affect the aspect of that sort of internal spaces when they're facing east. And light is consistent across the three different sort of schemes.
And the bottom picture, which shows a stepping in of those upper levels, what is the relevance of that for us today?
We were asked to consider the impact of modest side setbacks.
And so this shows a greater sky.
Correct, but it doesn't reveal any view of the street.
So these are specifically addressing view of street, not amenity impact that's other than view of street. Is that what
we've considered that elsewhere in the other materials? So the solar access and the daylighting access, as Philippe's been speaking to, was considered extensively. We're saying those other studies show there's no additional impact on overshadowing, solar access, daylighting. This particular page is about views of the street.
In terms of providing a modest setback, as the council resolution refers to those upper levels, whether or not that would provide for a wider aspect to the sky is uncontroversial. Yes, clearly it would. The building moves away, you see more sky. So we're certainly not disputing that that's the case. What it does, though, is it makes the building very much more difficult to build. It results in dead spaces that tend to accommodate air conditioning units and those sort of things if you've got them as part of your building, because they're not able to be used. You're not going to get access to it as a garden or anything like that. So what it does is it significantly impacts on the viability and the functionality of the development for what we say is marginal, minimal benefit to the adjoining property, given that we are on the southern side.
Okay, John.
Just if I can continue on this precise point. So as I understand it, your argument would be that the access to eastern sunlight for this balcony and the associated living space is unchanged.
Yes, correct.
Because you're facing almost directly east and you're not affecting that direct sunlight. It is as the current condition.
Correct.
Now, what about the internal light area, which is coming off that dining room? That ends up with a two-story blank wall in front of it.
I mean, we would argue it's designed as a light well.
So that would reduce its light considerably.
Well, we're on our walls on the southern side of it. I would expect it would impact on the diffuse light available to that
facing south.
But not direct light. So there's no direct sunlight falling on that window.
No. And if you guys go through the the design report, we attached the solar studies in terms of the heat map to really understand how much that southern elevation was getting sun. And it's minimal, just it's a south facing wall.
So you get, your argument would be you get a little bit less light, but it's still perfectly constructed brick wall. Or
it was designed as a light well. And one would have to expect that a 4-story building built to the boundary is one day going to have a comparable.
Ben, I wonder if I can take you to some of the boring planning stuff earlier. You indicated that given the location, there'd have to be some amenity impact. You can't build without something like that happening. And yet for us to exercise discretion, there's a number of considerations under the 2 clauses. Both of them talk about the proposal not being detrimental to the amenity of the adjoining properties. Reconcile your comments there and that clause.
It's an interesting problem created by the drafting of a lot of planning provisions, a lot of instruments. And that is, it talks about things having no impact or minimising impact. And they phrase things in absolute terms. And the only way to minimise would have no impact on the adjoining property would be to build nothing. And I don't think that anyone would suggest that that's the intended interpretation of these provisions. So they need to then be looked at in relative terms. Do they have an unacceptable impact? Do they have an excessive impact? Is it an impact greater than what one would reasonably expect? And so we say that is the proper interpretation, because the intent of the scheme can't be to prevent any impact, because that's an inevitable outcome of living in an urban environment.
So to get from 3 stories to 4 stories, we have to exercise discretion and apply those provisions.
Well, in fact, to get from 0 stories to 4 stories.
Yes, true.
Yep.
But to get,
yes,
it specifically talks about then going on to 4 stories. So we've then got to consider the amenity impact of that additional floor. And then under another clause, the same considerations, basically.
Largely the same.
So is it, and I think I read somewhere in one of your submissions, you think our job is to look at the difference between 3 stories and 5 stories, and whether that amenity impact is sufficient or not sufficient to approve or not approve.
One of the slight tweaks in our assessment materials is when we re-examined the clauses more closely. I don't believe that there is an additional difference between 3 and 4 in terms of the height impact. The 4th level is to do with the front setback from the street. So in other words, we consider the 4 stories without differentiation between 3 and 4 from a height impact perspective. Like, it might be a very technical distinction, but the way that we've approached it in our revised assessment is comparing 4 and 5 stories. But we do at points still make reference to the 3 stories, because that's been the nature of the discussion.
You're saying that going from 3 to 4 has no impact at all?
We're going from 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4 at all heights requires consideration.
I understand that, but you're saying that going from 3 to 4 in this proposal has no impact?
Sorry, yes. In general, our assessments are showing that the impact is no greater for 4 or 5 than what's been caused by 3 stories.
In terms of the overshadowing, bear in mind that we have those rear setbacks, so that mitigates the extent of overshadowing of 49F.
Yeah, I'm talking in terms of amenity impact on those neighbours.
On 49F, yes. So bear in mind that we have the building set back on the upper levels to the rear boundary. So what we've demonstrated though is that essentially a 4-story up to that extent would have a greater impact, but also that those outdoor living areas are already overshadowed by the building to our north.
Thank you. Further questions of the presenters? Francesca.
I asked earlier one of the presenters about the overshadowing studies and the accuracy of the view studies and the overstudies. Can you clarify, or can you make any comment in terms of that response that they feel they're inaccurate?
Which one in particular?
The plan that I was speaking to already, the first one I was speaking to, which is the view study.
We're talking about page
4, page 4 of your
Page 4?
Page 4 of your plan.
I guess that all the information that we got in here, if you guys look at some of the additional drawings that we submitted, we have sort of put every single level from our neighbors to the north, the south, and the east, the west, across all the levels that we have in our building. There is an accurate approach in the way that we have set up the massing sort of studies in particular, and this was highly interrogated by the design review panel, especially because when it comes to the height, there is an understanding that the additional height shouldn't be visible, cannot be visible from the street. So that, in terms of the accuracy that was put in this one, was very extensive.
Sorry, I'll just jump in, sorry. In between the last meeting and this one, we went and got the original plans of the adjoining buildings from the city. So those were the dimensions of the actual plans we used to form these renders.
So in terms of coming up with the details, can you speak a little bit further about the details in terms of how you determine things like the view study and the overshadowing? And I just want to get clarity because there's been some concerns raised in relation to the accuracy of the material. So can you speak to how you created these?
Well, we just use the existing levels that we get from the information that we got from the council. We got our survey in relation to our sites around the area. We got heights that we can just refer to the existing buildings to the south in particular, and the south sort of east western part of the site. And as I mentioned before, there was a big conversation through the design review process, especially around the street and how we were sort of setting our model and our massing in relation to the existing sort of adjacent sort of properties. So there is a lot of information that has gone in collaboration with the city to make sure that we get every level as close as possible to the reality.
And just, I guess, to clarify as well, we didn't Photoshop any tables and chairs into any images or anything. Those images were obtained from realestate.com. They're all publicly available, or we've used photos that were provided by those submitters. Now, I am a little concerned that there were non-specific allegations of things being inaccurate in the presentations. And I think Felipe's suggested or indicated that there was a robust process gone through to produce these images using the best available information that we could get. And we are extremely careful with these sort of things because we understand that you are going to be relying on them in making a decision. And if things are found to be misleading, then that is a serious credibility problem. No one's been able to suggest what exactly is inaccurate. So I would hope that in the absence of anything specific suggesting that something is wrong, that these will be accepted as being a fair and accurate representation of what's proposed.
Okay. Any further?
I just had one question. I did have some other questions on energy and will be addressed. Thank you. And thank you for the additional information provided as well. That I think helps us make a more informed decision. But I just had a totally separate question, and it relates to when I'm making decision, like granting discretion, something I consider is community benefit. So I had a question around the commercial tenancy on the ground floor. It's indicated to be a cafe restaurant. Do you have a tenant lined up for that, or is that a genuine sort of intent?
Existing tenant. At the moment, there's an existing cafe.
And they're going to.
And he's the arrangement with him would be that if we set up a cafe, same as what he's got, he would be the tenant in that.
Yeah, okay.
There are obviously commercial terms that need to be agreed, but he's indicated that he would be the preferred person.
Right, thank
Okay, any further questions? Okay, thank you, gentlemen. on to Chloe. Of the city officer. John.
Given what we've heard and where we are now, do you think that the proposal represents or is consistent with the conditions of Clause 4.8.1, particularly regarding amenity of the neighbours?
Yes.
Thank you.
Could you elaborate, please? Look, sorry, could you elaborate specifically in relation to the neighbouring sites at 45 and the neighbouring sites at 49?
Sure. The applicant obviously hasn't changed their drawings, so our assessment has remained the same. There will be an impact on amenity. As Mr. Doyle explained, the intent of 481 isn't to say there will be zero change to amenity. It's about having a look at what is accessible for those units. So there is still going to be some daylight, there is still going to be some ventilation available. There is multiple outlooks for that balcony at the front, and for those courtyards. There's also the existing situation where a lot of things are on the southern side and surrounded by existing built form. So the information provided by the applicant really just provides us with some additional information to demonstrate that, and we're satisfied that there is, while it's on balance, that the proposal is acceptable.
Thank you. Francesca.
My question goes to almost exactly the same question that I've had of the applicant. You're probably able to track the material that I'm talking to. It is the, excuse me, the material in relation to the applicant's additional material on view study. It is page 4 of their document. I can't give you the electronic number, but it's page 4 of the applicant's document. You can see on the, and it's specifically, my question is the same sort of question in relation to the impact on the adjoining existing development. The neighbour has spoken today. There is no conjecture from the neighbour about the layout of their property with the living spaces at the front of the building and that balcony at the front, which is on the top view. The middle window, which goes into where their dining area is covered by a wall. Can you speak to specifically could you elaborate further specifically your comments about acceptability and amenity impacts in the context of this particular plan, and it's really in relation to picture 1, picture 2 and any other comments, and I know you added a few more comments to it. Could you make some comments, because this for me is quite a significant discussion that we're having today.
Absolutely. The diagrams do show that there is a difference between how that building could be designed. So there's different ways that this development could be proposed, but really what we have in front of us is the 5-storey proposal, and it's built on the boundary. There will be elements of view and outlook that will be impacted. So there will be less view of the sky, there'll be less view of the street. There are multiple things that will be impacted. The building at the front has that pitch roof. So there is some daylight access that will be available. There will be some sky that will still be available for outlook. It will be different. There will be some impact, but it is an on-balance decision for us. And we believe that even with some changes with that 5th storey, the change wouldn't be significant. The biggest change would be dropping it down to 3 storeys, as those diagrams show.
So in the context of your comments you've just said against provision 481 and Schedule 7, am I hearing correctly that you're saying this proposal in front of us meets those amenity provision, satisfies all those provisions and is acceptable from amenity change on the neighbouring property? I'm specifically speaking to 45 in this junction, this immediate conversation.
Yes, correct. If it didn't meet that provision, we wouldn't be recommending approval because it needs to meet all of those tests in clause 481 to obtain any discretion.
And in 481, your comment is it's not an absolute, that there will be some change and it's an intent of what's acceptable.
Yeah, the decision in front of DAP today is really that the detrimental to amenity discussion. So DAP needs to be satisfied that this development isn't detrimental. And in our view, it is, while there is some impact, it is not so disastrous that it can't be supported.
And do you agree with these views from this page 4, which is plan 1 and plan 2 of the view line?
Yes.
And you say that middle one is acceptable?
Yes. Yep. But
your assessment, sorry, your assessment.
Yep. The officers reviewed the information. We have limitations. We don't have the architectural software that the applicant has, but in our sort of test and review, we're satisfied with what they've presented is accurate with the information we have.
Thank you. Further questions of, yes, councillor?
Yeah, I just wanted to pick that apart a little bit in terms of each scenario, not all of them, but ones that perhaps demonstrate different criteria or different scenarios to be assessed. So if you were to take the small light well of the units to the north, including Mrs. Catalini's, if I'm looking at, and I'm assuming the assumption being that a 3-story with a pitched roof barn is the starting point, how do you arrive at an assessment that the outlook from that 4th level window on the adjoining property, which would be into the roof space, in other words, a 33-degree pitch away and up to the sky, that hasn't had a more detrimental impact by them putting a 4-story and a 5-story parapet right against that. So is the level of assessment, does it go down to that level of detail, or have you sort of said, well, that might be worse off, but there are other bits that are better off?
Yeah, look, I think when we undertake these, when we undertake these assessments, we really have to focus on the development proposal in front of us. There's so many hypotheticals that can be proposed. Obviously, the applicant has chosen to present the information this way to show how the development, if it was designed differently and didn't seek so much discretion, how there would still be an impact. We can't necessarily compare what might be compared to what is, but we do have a look and go, look, if what they've presented here is accurate, then yes, there will be more vision out to the sky. But because that building, that apartment and that light well and dining room window in particular, if that's what we're focusing on now, it has that southern outlook. So the direct sunlight is already impacted by its own building. The addition of roof or wall in this location will further impact it. So I guess we have to have a look at each piece of information the applicant provides, but ultimately it is based on the set of drawings that the applicant is proposing to get an approval for. So we have to look at that parapet wall.
Is it fair to say though, so for example, again, using that exact example, where you've got, if the Catalini unit has a rear area, a middle light well and a front area, that the balancing act of the impacts on all 3 spaces is measured as being less than if it was a 3-story building? Is that how you would arrive at that on that side?
Yeah, we definitely have a look at what else that apartment has access to. So the balcony at the front, for example, doesn't just have a southern outlook, it has an eastern outlook as well. There are other openings in the building on other sides. Obviously each courtyard and balcony is used in a different way. So we do need to look at each opening and each balcony, but the whole apartment is lived in, so it is all part of the story.
Okay. Further questions of the office? No, thank you, Chloe. All right. We'll move on to the item itself. And there is a responsible authority recommendation to refuse the application. Some reasons there. So I'm going to seek a mover in a second for the recommendation for refusal. Is there a mover for that? Sullivan, thank you. Is there a seconder for that? No. Okay, so that lapses for want of a seconder. We'll then move to the officer recommendation, which is a recommendation for approval with conditions. Is there a mover for that recommendation? And is there a seconder? Do I have a seconder for that recommendation? Thank you, councillor. Okay, Francesca.
Thank you. I have considered this proposal, and I suppose I've broken into a number of particular aspects. One, I've considered the general development form and scale as it presents to the street, and I'm comfortable that meets the provisions as set out in the documents in the scheme and in the policy provisions. The proposal, I've been up and down that street many times, sat out there and had a look at the street, walked all around the area to make sure I had a good context of it, got stuck in lots of traffic, and comfortable that the design as it presents to Pakenham is appropriate in its context. It is respectful of the heritage. The information we have provided from both in the report is that in terms of heritage impact and heritage sitting comfortably with, it does that. I'm comfortable with access the way it proposes down a narrow driveway to the rear parking. It is appropriate in the context of this site and in minimising disruption along the street. The biggest concern, as you've already heard today, has been the impact, particularly from my perspective, on the neighbouring property at 45 Pakenham Street, and there's been a lot of discussion in relation to that. I thank all of the parties that have provided the material, and I have intensively considered the material that's been put forward by the applicant on the views, as well as the submissions raised by the neighbouring property and the comments provided by City Officer. Particularly the comments relate to the application of clause 4.8.1 of the scheme and how that is applied to this site and how that is applied generally across the scheme area, that it's a balance against amenity, the extent of amenity impacts, rather than having a zero change to what is currently provided for. In addition, I consider the current configuration of the adjoining property, which has boundary development quite close to the boundary, including its own light well and balcony locations, which are also part of the consideration for this development. However, I am satisfied that the material that's been provided from both the applicant as well as the information provided by the applicant in relation to the views that are provided and the nature on where they're taken, as well as City Officers' comments in relation to the amenity impacts, and I am specifically speaking to the front balcony and its proximity on the southern boundary, on balance create an acceptable outcome in relation to amenity, and therefore satisfies the provisions of the scheme in that relation. In terms of the impact on the neighbouring property at 49F, I'm satisfied that the matters relating to that site are appropriately addressed, that development construction provisions are available in order to minimise any impact on the neighbouring property through construction. But I also note that the development provisions do allow for quite substantial development as it relates to that adjoining property. And from my perspective, it's reasonable to consider that any development would be applicable in relation to those development provisions. In relation to the additional height that this proposal is seeking, particularly in relation to that site, the 49F, I'm satisfied that this development does not create any additional impact to that development, and that any reasonable development on this site to the rear at 49F would have a level of impact. I note the city's provisions contained within its framework include and support intensification of development in and around Fremantle area through consideration of both locational context as well as building form and the intensity of that building form in this particular area. So I support the proposal and recommendation.
Councillor Van Dorsen.
Thank you. I agree with everything Deputy Presiding Member as Francesca has said, so I won't go on too much. But yeah, this one was a really tough one to make a decision on, and I think and I do agree and accept the arguments put forward today around the amenity impact. I think that is our key. Our decision in granting discretion is that whether it's acceptable to have some degree of amenity impact and whether that's increased as well with the additional floors. And I agree that in the scheme, it's not intended to have zero impact. Otherwise, yeah, you wouldn't be able to build anything. And I have been involved in many discussions on this point, and yes, I do agree with that term, and it is looking at what is acceptable in terms of acceptability, and yeah, what would one reasonably expect in terms of being built next door to you. I also agree. I think in making my decision on this one, and thank everyone for coming today for that additional information that was put forward. It has been a bit tough, but I think in making my decision today, I think it has been demonstrated that the discretion can be granted, and then it's sort of the degree, looking at the discretion of variation, particularly with the additional floor, the degree of variation being sought, the nature of it. One of the key things for me was the context and setting, and that was something I struggled with as well, whether a designer should sort of consider its context and individual units next door a bit more closely, but it's a tough one. I think in an urban setting and what's permitted, and you do sort of look what's previously approved as well. And I think there should have been some sort of consideration of that being built up, to the southern boundary and how that impacts on the adjoining site, and that being number 45. And I think one of the things as well, looking at what is permitted under the scheme, and I think that sort of degree of difference of what the impacts on the neighbours, I don't think it's great enough to refuse this application, and all things considered. In reading the assessments, I do note that the application was supported by our planning officers and has been reviewed and assessed in detail, and I do think that they do a very good job and they do a thorough job. And I know these sort of, it's not always getting a recommendation for approval. It's not always easy at the City of Fremantle from the officers. No, they do interrogate things, particularly on heritage. And this was supported by our heritage officers as well as the Heritage Council, and also supported by the Design Advisory Committee. So it does have full support of all the relevant technical experts and people that were consulted on this. And I think, again, coming to that context question, I think I do sort of lean towards the Design Advisory Committee to see how they've seen that, and they find it acceptable. So I sort of lent into that as well. And I think I mentioned earlier just something that I generally look at with applications when they're seeking discretion. I think it is a community benefit overall, and I do think this one does have a community benefit and aligns with our strategic objectives at the City of Fremantle in terms of providing an activation of the street with the cafe, retaining the cafe use at the ground floor, as well as just having additional residents as a city is something that we're looking to do. Yeah, so not an easy decision, but I would like to talk through some conditions. Is that, I'll actually, I trust now's the time.
Yes.
I have spoken to Andrew previously. I do actually trust that he'll address them in detail. So I will hand to him.
Well,
that's okay.
Yes, I'll find another speaker.
Yes, sorry. Oh, when Andrew is ready to speak, yeah, we've had that discussion. That I was sort of satisfied that we could manage things with some conditions as well, some amendments to conditions that I hope will be supported.
So you don't want to move any amendments at this stage?
Not myself, no.
Okay, thank you. Further speakers? Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you. And obviously I, like I'm sure most panel members, relatively line ball on this one. It is a very good proposal. There are a lot of things to like about this development in terms of the way it's laid out and the design of the units in terms of their own amenity and the like, but then it has on the flip side the impacts on neighbouring properties, which obviously are significant enough to draw a lot of criticism of the proposal. Our job is to assess that on balance. My assessment on balance continues to be that the overtowering aspects of this development on adjoining properties have impacts. Some of the impacts to the north, I guess, on balance, would seem to be almost reasonable. That side of it is not worrying me as much. I'm not disrespecting the fact that the property owners there have concerns, but I do accept the swings and roundabouts of the way in which this proposal, by setting it back from the rear boundary by 6 metres, certainly provides a reasonable level of amenity to the rear balconies of not just the top unit, but all of the units in that development. But the compromise is that it doesn't have a great amenity outcome for the light well. The issue of the front balconies, I have to say that while it might have been emphasised about the views to the street by neighbours, I would argue that that conversation was very much focused on the amenity of the balconies with respect to light, and that's why the conversation was about the difference between an impact of a 3-storey parapet wall, a 4-storey parapet wall, a 5-storey parapet wall, and whether or not some staggering of those top 2 parapets should be considered. But I think there is that argument of how do you balance that out in terms of, well, if you did that, you'd probably end up pushing the units further back, and then you'd have an impact further behind, etc., etc. I'm much more worried, I have to say, about the units underneath Pamela Catalani's units, because they are so badly designed that their amenity would have been terribly impacted with the 3-storey building, let alone a 4 or 5. But that is just, we cannot overcompensate for poor design of adjoining buildings, and that was a case of very bad design that probably would never be allowed today. But that's not a reason to stop a development going forward in terms of those ones. But I do still worry about the southern parapet, the impacts on that. I do have an acceptance that, as the proponents have said, that a 3-storey boundary-to-boundary wall would have had a more detrimental impact on 49A, E and F, in terms of the overtowering being literally right above them as opposed to a little bit further away. But a part of me still has the view that when the clauses actually talk about the staggering of development, the built form, that it's not just from the street. In scenarios where you have heritage buildings that are only ever going to be 1-storey, and that then allows for a view of new buildings, when you go from 1-storey to 5-storey, albeit the 1-storey heritage buildings are probably almost like a 2-storey building. They're certainly 1.5 stories. But even still, when you go from a 1-storey building that you can see from the Esplanade, from Henry Street, through these areas, and then you're suddenly confronted by a 5-storey building, that doesn't necessarily ring as being a staggered approach to the built form of the precinct. And I think there is a little bit of over-reliance that parapet walls in the West End can just be 3 and 4 stories. The scheme is written in a way that actually talks about that in certain scenarios, a lesser height development might be the appropriate height. And I think in the scenarios where you have 1-storey buildings that are never going to get built out, that we do have an obligation to consider a lesser height, or at least in this situation, not going from 1.5 stories to 5 stories straight away, but from 1.5 stories to 3 stories, and then a 4th and 5th set back. So there is an argument, I believe there still is an argument that suggests at the very least that the southern elevation should have been modified. However, if that's not to be the outcome, it does still worry me that the resolution of that southern elevation needs to be subject to further consideration in terms of the detail. The applicants have shown a mural as an approach to how to soften the impact of a 5-storey high brown wall. I'm not sure that I want to sign off on that in its entirety. And so one of the conditions I would like to have considered is, and we don't have the amendment up on the screen, so perhaps it's possible to have the alternative recommendation up. But there's an amendment to the clause that deals with materiality being the subject of further approval through the City of Fremantle on advice from the Design Advisory Committee.
Yes.
Oh, okay. So I did give Chloe some pre-warning that I would be seeking some conditions. So through you,
is this
Chair,
a
can I ask?
separate condition or an amendment to?
Well, I thought we discussed an amendment originally, but
yes, Chloe,
I think
you could.
Yeah, so condition 17 talks about the finish of boundary walls. I'm suggesting that we add an additional sentence that says the southern boundary wall shall be appropriately finished and detailed to ensure its compatibility with the West End heritage area, recognising its visibility to the public realm. There is also a condition that obviously talks to DAC reviewing materials and finishes, so that leaves it open for whether it is a mural on that wall or it is an updated design, but I'll have a discuss.
Wording of your sentence again, please.
Sure.
So that's condition 17.
Yes.
Yep. The southern boundary wall shall be appropriately finished and detailed to ensure its compatibility with the West End heritage area, recognising its visibility to the public realm.
Do you have that wording? Do you want to just send it to Dax and I'll just share on the screen so everyone's.
So I'm on that basis of advice, I'm happy to move that as an amendment.
Okay, I'll just seek a seconder for that amendment. Councillor Van Dawson, thank you.
So just speaking on just very briefly, what I don't want or did not want to see locked in was that a mural is the solution, because that's not necessarily it's not necessarily the only approach that should be considered. And in any case, it's not our job to decide whether public artworks should be dealt with in this way. If it is to be a mural, it may not actually be the public artwork component of a development, because it might not meet the criteria. So I wanted that to be respected, that process. So I think the appropriate way is to deal with it is to put it back to the City of Fremantle, and that they look at it from the point of view of the Design Advisory Committee, and if they also want to look at it from the point of view of the public artworks process as well, that's fine. But I don't want to necessarily buy into the detail just to create the right process.
All right, as the seconder, Councillor Van Dawson, did you want to speak?
No, I don't need to speak.
Are there any other speakers on the amendment? No, okay, I'll then put that amendment. All in favour? That's unanimous, thank you.
So the another one was, I just wanted to check about the planter beds criteria. So there was that suggestion during the last few weeks that the planter beds of the unit at the front, I think is going to be changed. Is that adequately dealt with now in the alternative recommendation, or do we need additional?
Yeah, additional. There was condition 27 that was added, yes. Requiring further detail to be provided.
Right, so you're satisfied that that covers that?
Yeah, so we'll need detailed drawings from them.
Specifically, it says 1.3 metres, so that was another.
Okay, the floor is still with you, Councillor.
Yeah, so I am concerned about overlooking, particularly from units 202, 203, 301, 302 and 401. They're the ones that have the potential to either look to the roof terrace at 49. They have an open roof terrace, so I'm talking about the bedrooms of units that will be looking straight down onto that roof terrace. and also the units that at the rear that have the potential to look straight down into the courtyards at 49A, F and E. So I've asked whether Chloe could come back with a recommendation that required the usual clause of the compliance with the overlooking criteria. So if I could ask Chloe to present.
Absolutely, I'll send this through to yourselves and get it up on the screen because it's relatively, it's a fairly lengthy model condition.
So this is an additional condition?
Yes.
So it'll be condition 28.
Once it's up, just double check the units. Really, it's just a condition to ensure that what is shown on the plans for some of those units is installed, and that those additional conditions are additional screening requirements are added in. So send it through to that.
Yeah, I'll just wait for it to come through and I'll share it on the screen.
Okay. While we're waiting, perhaps you could read it out, Chloe.
Prior to the lodgement of a building permit application for the development hereby approved, a detailed drawing showing how the bedrooms for apartments 201, 202, 203 and 204, the outdoor terrace and bedrooms for apartment 301 and 401, and the balcony for apartment 302 is to be screened in accordance with the R codes, either fixed or obscured screening.
Okay, there it is on the screen.
Possibly just double check that.
All right, just making sure if I can see it.
And then a prior to occupation screening being installed.
Okay.
So I'll move that one.
Councillor Sullivan's moved that. Is there a second for that one? Councillor Van Dawson, thank you.
I would say that I'm not anticipating that will completely remove the potential for any of those rooms to have outlooks. It does appear to me that it's very much a how to blinker the side view, but the view straightforward should be more than adequately able to be dealt with. Some of the rooms, particularly the bedrooms, as was mentioned by the applicant, already have some degree of sophistication in the fins and the like, but there may just be some slight additional need. It's not just about the potential for people to occasionally look down, as the applicant was suggesting. The impact is actually also in the reverse direction of when you're looking up and you see windows and the lights are on and everything like that, and you're not going to sit there and go, oh, there's someone there occasionally. You will always take the view that you're being overlooked irrespective of someone being there. And so it's very important that people's amenity are protected, a little bit less so in a city environment. Obviously, these things are a little bit more relaxed in that environment. But I think in the case of 49A units F and E, they have such limited capacity for outdoor enjoyment that we do need to protect their amenity reasonably well.
Thank you, Councillor Van Dawson. Second.
Yes, no, I've got nothing to add.
Are there any other speakers on this amendment? No. All right, I'll put the amendment. All in favour? Just carried unanimously. Thank you. Still with you, Councillor Sullivan.
I think that is the three of them. Oh, yes, the heritage wall, the extent of overlap between the rear of this site, where the car stackers are, we're talking around about, I think it's around about 6 metres of overlap between the heritage wall and where the car stackers are. So it's not a significant length, but it does still worry me, but it is a building licence issue primarily. And I asked Chloe whether there was an advice note that perhaps we could put in there that just emphasised the fact that there is concern. I think the applicant does need to at some stage demonstrate that they can do this successfully without having a potential detrimental impact on the heritage fabric of the adjoining property. So I've asked Chloe to see if there is a footnote, advice note that could be added.
With the Chair's permission, I'll read something out and might need some workshopping, Councillor Sullivan. The applicant is advised to ensure appropriate measures and construction methodology are used during construction to avoid damage to adjoining properties, including any boundary walls and footings of heritage fabric.
Happy with that.
That's advice note 12.
I'll move that way.
Moved by Councillor Sullivan, seconded please. Councillor Van Dawson, thank you.
Thank you. It's advice note. I think it's straightforward. So,
any further speakers on that? No, I'll put that advice note. All in favour? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. Still with you, Councillor Sullivan.
thank you for that. Those are my amendments, and I do still have strong reservations, but as I said, it is one that is close to approvable for me. But at the end of the day,
yes, look, I've got similar concerns with, as have been expressed several times now. I think within its boundary walls, the design itself is a very good one. And certainly as it regards the street, there's a lot of work being done on its impact to the street and the general environment. And I think that's all been resolved very well. I've got absolutely no problem with the overall height. I think that's been justified. I think it really does come down to the impact on the amenity of the neighbours. And that was certainly a concern at the previous meeting. And it's interesting that the applicant has come back with unchanged plans, but rather more explanation, which is helpful. Thank you. And there's no question in my mind that if that amenity be more front of mind as this was being developed, there might have been different ways of having this plan evolve over time. I recognise that there's very large void spaces in the middle of the site, which may have been redistributed, for example, to have some less effect on some of number 45. I don't think there's much more we can do with number 49. I think that's pretty much, any impacts there are pretty much inevitable, and I think they've been mitigated to the extent they reasonably can be with this plan. So it becomes then an on-balance decision, not of what might otherwise have been, because I think there could have been different approaches to this which would have had different amenity impacts. The question is whether what we have in front of us is on balance acceptable. And I must say I've been very open-minded about this all through like before the meeting as I was reading this and through the meeting. And I think the balance for me is that it has, I think, as I think Councillor Sullivan said, the overall approach of number 45 is not something which I think would have been approved today. It's not an outstanding design, I don't think, and I think the way that number 22 has been put in there it's got a lot of compromises. However, and there will be some amenity impacts, and that's been articulated very well by Ms. Town. I think there will be some amenity impacts. I think, though, that they are still acceptable. I think clearly to the balcony to the west, there is essentially no amenity impacts. There's a bit of view that you would have otherwise have got, which is not there. I think to the east, I think on really proper analysis, there is really not that much change to the amount of sunlight that comes in, and that's the principal impact. There won't be more difficult to get a view of the street, but the amount of sunlight that comes in, eastern sunlight and so on, I don't think changes very much. I think that's been demonstrated. The light well then becomes a light well, not a view opportunity in the middle of that unit. Does that add to unsatisfactory or such impact that it starts to offend clause 4.8.1? And I think very much on balance, and we could go either way on this, but very much on balance, I think it is not sufficient to offend clause 4.8.1, and therefore because the overall approach that what we've got in front of us in other regards is a very good one, I think that we can approve this as is. So I think, again, on balance, I would be going for an approval of this.
Thank you, John. And look, I support the approval recommendation. To me, I've wrestled with this for quite some time, and I don't know how many times I've read the documentation. There are aspects of this which are easily dealt with: land use, heritage, the design side of it, the streetscape, all those things, quite easy. But it simply comes back to this amenity question and whether or not there is sufficient impact to say that it doesn't meet the requirements of clause 4.8.1. Having read the applicant's documentation, their assessment of the amenity impacts, I've come to the conclusion that while it's a line ball decision, I've come to the conclusion that I think those amenity impacts are not sufficient for me to say it needs to be refused. I'm therefore err on the side of the other side of the fence and say that I think there is sufficient information there to say those amenity impacts are not so great as to warrant a refusal, but I think I can support an approval for this. So I'm going to say that I support the approval with the amended conditions in front of us. So back to Francesca as the proposer to wind up the debate.
I have nothing further to say.
I'll put the recommendation as amended. All in favour? Against? That's carried 4-1. Thank you. Want a break? Yeah. Adjournment for 5 minutes. Francesca and John. Thank you. We're back in session. And go to item 3.2, which is the 4-storey hotel in South Terrace, Fremantle. 2 presenters. So, gentlemen, 3 minutes each. Oh, there's only 2 presenters, are there?
Just 2 presenters.
Yep. Yes. Okay, 3 minutes each. I'll tell you when your time's up. Over to you.
Well, good morning, DAP panel members. My name is Declan Cregan. I'm a town planner from Urbis and speaking to item 3.2. Firstly, we're really pleased with the RAR recommendation for approval, and I note that both the city officers and the elected members put forward their approval for this. These recommendations come after extensive engagement and refinement with the city officers. There are a few key planning items I'd like to touch on. However, it's worth discussing the collaborative process that this project has gone through. We know what was initially lodged has undergone significant refinement. This is a tricky site and it's a really important site on Fremantle's main street. The design refinements has maintained the project vision throughout and has strived to achieve the best design outcome possible. In the memo that we circulated to the DAP, we noted several meetings with the city's planning and heritage officers. These meetings would typically discuss detail and how the proposal could be refined for a more effectively reflect and express the heritage context whilst incorporating a contemporary presentation. A critical element of the refinement process was balancing heritage with modern architecture, modern codes, requirements and standards. Following each of the meetings with these officers, the project team would refine, rework, recirculate and discuss with the officers an improved design. The design was iterative and it was collaborative. From a planning perspective, one of the key items is building height. We reiterate that a key reason for the proposed building height is the large Western Power transformer in the basement of the site. The presence of the transformer is actually a key reason why this site has always been separated and elevated from South Terrace. And the transformer powers much of Fremantle, including the hospital, so relocation is simply not practical. The project vision was to bring the building back to the street and have a really meaningful connection with South Terrace. Constraints, such as the transformer, have meant that the proposed height was necessary. So importantly, the RAR, it supports the overall building height and it recognises that the height does not have a detrimental impact to the area. And finally, I'll just quickly touch on conditions. So for condition 9, we agree with the intent of this condition and no issues with the intent. However, the city can seek any internal referral advice as needed, and we think that enshrining additional DAC referral through the condition in this instance is onerous. Given our strong collaboration with the officers to date, we believe direct liaison is the best approach and the condition should reflect this. Additionally, condition 16, we simply seek flexibility to deliver the public art on site. There may be an opportunity to investigate public art to the laneway or to the rear of the building, and the condition should allow this to be explored. Our specific wording change requests are in the memo, but happy to discuss these further if necessary. So in summary, this is a fantastic proposal. It will reconnect this site to South Terrace and it balances heritage with contemporary design. The planning variations are justified and supportable, and we hope that you approve this development today with our condition changes in mind. Thank you.
Oh, 3 minutes on the dot. We'll go to the next presenter, I think, and then we can combine the questions.
Is it possible to bring up the 10 principles document that was sent through last week? I can start while that comes up. If you can go to page 37, because I'll touch on that first. Thank you, panel members. My name is Michael Benson from Benson Studio. The journey to reach this outcome has been rigorous and deeply collaborative, developed over more than 12 months in close consultation with the city's planning team, heritage officers, elected members as well. We first presented this concept to the mayor and some councillors who attended site in early 2024. This detailed engagement has resulted in a recommendation for approval from the city's planning officers and the council, and we're excited to see this long vacant site reactivated. This proposal delivers a high quality, contextually responsive hotel that reflects the West End's unique character and introducing a contemporary model of accommodation not currently seen in Australia. The design responds directly to the DAC comments commentary, and we took all of that on board and aligns with the city's own West End heritage policy. If you can bring up page 37 there, please. So the pod design is inspired by hotel accommodation through Europe, and you'll be able to see it when it comes up. The project introduces secure, acoustically separated pods, which you can see on the right-hand side image, and in the middle there is a section through them. So these are king-size beds with a lockable door, windows, cabinets for luggage, individual ventilation control and lighting control. They are not backpacker dorms. They are fully enclosed spaces to offer additional layer of acoustic protection and guest amenity that cater to modern travellers seeking a shared spaces for work and interaction. It's an ideal solution for a vibrant city like Fremantle, and in particular this specific site. Hence why we believe we've achieved some recommendations for approval. On page 35, the ground floor plan is largely given over to communal use for guests, and there is a cafe experience there to bring in and activate that street frontage. It includes a lounge, listening rooms, public cafe, and designed to promote that civic engagement. Page 34, one up, please. Includes a basement bar, which is a double high volume space with dual access from South Terrace and Essex Lane, adding vibrancy and natural surveillance to Essex streets and supporting Fremantle's own hospitality, renowned hospitality culture. A key constraint was that Western Power transformer that's located in the basement, and it has pushed up the height. Currently, when you go to this site, it's a metre out of the ground, and it's not a great civic outcome. So we've worked hard where we can to lower that interface, but it has driven some of the height in that existing basement. Also the height, we could have reduced the parapet. We could have had an exposed roof, which would have reduced that street height. But working with the city's heritage officers and our own heritage team, we designed a strong parapet line to align with the neighbouring built form and reinforce that streetscape. We worked really hard, very hard to engage through that. Yeah, I'll just wrap it up. So in closing, this is a high quality, architecturally resolved development that fills in a critical gap in the streetscape and brings life, activity and economic benefit to Fremantle city centre. And quite rightly, we believe it's been recommended for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Questions of the presenters? Ms. Francis.
I have a question to either of you. My question is about acoustics. I know there's a report in here. The report has some language in there that basically says we think we've got it right, but we might have to do some other treatments. I suppose my question is around when will you know you've got it right at point of building permit submission? Because obviously this is identified in the report, and familiar with the area, is a evening entertainment precinct which has a reasonable amount of noise and music and all those other sorts of things going on. The report talks about its locational context, and I'm conscious that it's discretionary use. So my question is specifically about acoustics and ensuring that those are resolved early on to ensure that the functioning of the precinct as a entertainment, including evening activity, will not be impacted by, will be enhanced by this development and not be impacted.
Thank you. I can answer that in one part. Well, I think firstly, this style of accommodation is attracting people who want to stay in a vibrant city centre. This is the exact type, the reason that this style of accommodation has been proposed for this site is not a luxury hotel. You're paying between $100 and $150 a night. And the idea is that the rooms are small, like other hotels that Patrick has, the Hougoumont, that the guests are encouraged to be part of Fremantle, to get out and engage with Fremantle. So that's, I guess, the first comment. The second comment on the acoustics is, as I mentioned earlier, we actually have 2 layers of acoustic separation. So the acoustic report doesn't take into account the actual pods themselves, because technically they can't take that into account when they're doing their acoustic report. So it's taken into account the facade. But in reality, if you look at the floor plan, the actual pods sit within that building envelope, and they are acoustically separated from each other. They're quite thick walls, so they have their own acoustic separation from wind within the space. So it's not like a backpacker's dorm where they're just beds within that space. These are doors that are sealed, glazing and quite thick walls and roof to them. So we're over and above, I guess, that acoustic separation that is not indicated in the acoustic report. So we're in our professionally opinion, we're well above the standard acoustic separation that you would achieve in a normal hotel.
And that material is provided as part of your, we've got material here.
Yeah.
But is it also being provided as part of your documentation for your building permit?
They will be, yes. Yeah, correct.
Because some of these assessment for acoustic is post-development.
Yeah.
And I'm conscious that the material in your acoustic report talks about dealing with materials because of its location and because of the need to deal with the acoustics as part of the construction.
Yes, so they will be, and I'll explain why that was the case. We are finalising which of two systems. One is either a SIP panel, which is a structurally insulated panel, which is 142 millimetres thick, or we are also finalising in the next few weeks whether they're a 50 dB wall, which is also fire rated. So we are finalising that conclusion in the next few weeks, which will be well prior to building permit.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions? Yes.
Can you speak about your ground floor level, not so much your basement bar, your ground floor level and the interaction with South Terrace? And I'm talking about the general public's interaction. It appears that there's a categorisation of general public, and then on plan it appears there was still a reasonably open plan that others could go and use, or are they separated out from general public to occupant?
I don't think there's any, it's a typical hotel lobby where the public can come in and meet guests of the hotel. So there's no restriction there. The offering, the small cafe offering is specifically aimed at the public, but it also caters to the people in the building, provides staff presence, but it really is to activate that, that alfresco line at the front. But the majority of the ground floor is specifically designed for the tenants of the hotel to mingle, carry out their business, but they can invite people in. Yeah. And people are welcome to walk in. Really.
So the plan doesn't appear to show, sorry if I may, Matthew, the plan doesn't appear to show a barrier separation between occupant and general public.
Well, there is barrier between the rooms and that area, but not between the public and the guests of the hotel. No.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions? No. Thank you, gentlemen. Okay. Move to the officer. Officer Chloe. Are there questions of Chloe? Councillor Van Dors.
I just had a question in relation to the proposed amendments to conditions that the applicants put forward. So condition 16 in relation to public art, just confirming that the proposed modification, just taking out the monetary value, that's all already dictated in the policy. It doesn't actually change the condition itself or the nature of it. I still have to comply with the policy and that how much they spend.
I think when I have a look at what the applicant's proposing, I think they're proposing to add in just clarification that it could be artwork on the site rather than deleting it out. So absolutely comfortable.
Apologies.
Yes, no, comfortable with that. But yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you for clarifying that. And condition 9, do you have any objections to what they've proposed there to remove that advice of the DAC? Would it still go to the DAC internally anyway, or does that have any?
Yeah, look, as the applicant pointed out, it's at my discretion. The policy actually references it's at the manager's discretion when something is reviewed by DAC. So a condition like this we would seek their advice on, because when you start getting to details of materials, it's really valuable to have a group of working architects provide you some advice on that. We included in the condition, and it's a standard condition that we use for any developments of this scale, just to set that expectation with the applicants that that's what would occur.
Yeah, and there's no cost to the applicant going to the DAC.
No, there's I think they get 4 goes at it, but for materials and finishes, it's resets. Yeah, thank you.
Further questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to further check on that. I mean, just in terms of the language that's used. So where it says on advice of the DAC, is the correct understanding of that to say you'll have due regard to it, but at the end of the day, it's the city's call, i.e. your call?
Correct, yes.
Right. And the other part of it is when it says it's submitted to the satisfaction of the city, in addition to the DAC, you would seek input from other staff, is that?
That's correct, particularly with a site like this one where there's heritage implications. It's a balanced decision, a bit like our recommendation. DAC is part of the picture, but yes, we would seek advice from others.
Right. So, I mean, obviously the applicant's been relatively satisfied with the conversations they've had with the heritage officers, if that would continue.
Yes, absolutely. It's been a very positive set of discussions.
Any further questions of Chloe? No, thank you, Chloe. All right, we'll move on into the item itself. We can deal with those amendments during a debate, but I'm looking for a mover and a seconder for the published recommendation for approval with conditions. Is there a mover for that? Councillor Sullivan. Seconder? Awesome, thank you. Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, presiding member. I absolutely commend this proposal to you. When one looks at it from scratch, just in its presented form, there may be sort of a bunch of questions. From a planning point of view, a land use point of view, obviously the notion of a pod hotel is something that is sort of running a fair bit ahead of where the planning schemes, the planning land use understanding is at the moment. So we are sort of treading a little bit into uncharted waters of land use, but at the end of the day, it is a tourism accommodation type building. But I think it is particularly better suited to this site than would be a 5-star hotel or some other type of tourism accommodation. In fact, in many ways, I think it is the absolutely best form of land use in tourist accommodation, because it does essentially encourage you not to be in your hotel room. It's not so much of a room, but a bed, and encourages you to be out in the city. It encourages you also to be out spending money at the restaurants, the cafes, the bars, all of those things. And the only concern that I know that has been raised is whether that then has a detrimental impact on those very same activities that would be attracting people to stay in this hotel, i.e. the vibrancy in the street and the life around there. But I'm very satisfied that this has a double layer of protection, that acoustic ceiling of the external part of the building will create an internal space that is protecting itself to a reasonable degree, to the reasonable degree that is expected from the activities in the street. But then the layering of that with a pod itself, where you basically are, sleeping on top of the next person, but you don't really want to hear them. You don't want to hear the person next to you, or 3 inches on the other side of the wall away from you. So these pods, by all my understanding, are incredibly well insulated in terms of acoustics in their own right. There are obviously rooms which are not pods, they're hotel, mini hotel suites, but those are either facing the laneway, which in its own right has a potential issue, but there are no nightclubs or pubs or anything like that directly out the back. But also the ones on the top floor are well set back from the street. So they already have if you like, a horizontal space between them and the edge of the street, which provides another layer of protection acoustically. So I'm pretty confident that the design has got it, has produced a very sound approach to dealing with noise, if I can put it that way. The other aspects is I really want to commend the way in which this proposal has been developed up. So DAP doesn't always see where the genesis of some of the things that we're seeing now have come from. This design has gone through numerous iterations, and I particularly want to congratulate the applicant in terms of both the small cafe and the basement bar, which is no longer, it started life as a basement bar. It felt like it was in the car park, and there's now a double volume bar. And the reason I want to congratulate them is it does things which are really important. It not only activates a laneway that is perhaps a slightly less safe environment of the city, but it actually encourages people who aren't familiar with the city to start adventuring into the back streets, the laneways of Fremantle, and that's where the real charm starts to come forth. And the more we do that, the less we rely on an cappuccino strip entertainment zone in the city, and that's a very highly desirable component to be able to encourage people into those other parts of the city. But it also does it in a way where when you're walking past along South Terrace and you look through the front doors, you can see literally straight through the building out into the laneway beyond. So it does very much draw you into that space as well. And in that sense, provides a gateway to the laneways of Fremantle. And I think that's been a particularly clever approach. The other thing that I know has changed from their earlier approach has been how to deal with the fact that you have a large hotel lobby. Because it's a pod style hotel, you're trying to create a significant amount of guest amenity spaces that allow them to do their work, to eat their meals, to socialise, do all the things that you might otherwise do in your hotel room. So there's a great emphasis on that. And the original plan showed all this al fresco, and it was like, well, how's that going to be activated? And it actually, as it turns out, without actually having a cafe in the building, they probably wouldn't have been allowed to have al fresco on the street just to service hotel guests. So we were in this scenario, and they literally, the applicants have come back and said, no, you're right. It does need that level of cafe environment into the mix. And I think what it will do is actually harmonise us between people who are just who are part of our city every day and those guests who are coming into the city. So there is this sort of a permeable space between the guest and the rest of the city. They also provide opportunities for expanding the type of mix of hospitality venues. You know, try get a coffee after 3 o'clock in Fremantle and you're battling. Try going to a pub before 8 p.m. and it's dead. So these sorts of opportunities where you can have cafes that go well into the late afternoon because they're already servicing their own hotel bars that sort of have that sort of crossover feel are really important. The last thing I wanted to mention was in terms of height and any concerns about that. I know that there were some views expressed that, well, you know, your building's quite tall, it's taller than the building next door. When I look at the buildings that are in South Terrace, and I look at the TAFE building, I look at Metropolis over the road, the Sail and Anchor Hotel, the Evan Davies building, which is the building that has the old Dome Cafe, they're all significantly taller than the building right next door to this site. And while this building feels a little bit big in terms of the building next door, in the context of the overall street that you can see when you're standing, you know, in that vicinity, is one that, yeah, it does fit in. And in particular, they could have easily come forward with 3 stories at the street and a 33-degree pitch roof coming off it. And it would have looked like a building that might have fitted quite well into Rockingham with its style of architecture, but doesn't fit in well necessarily with Fremantle. And the heritage advice that was strongly given to them was that a strong traditional parapet as the element that sits across the top was particularly important. And this building is so wide compared to some, the scale of it basically needed that extra height on the streetscape to achieve that sort of correct weighting, that correct distribution of the layers of the form. So on all of those reasons, I know that there have been some concerns, but I'm very confident that the proposal has been well resolved and should be supported.
Thank you, Councillor Sullivan. Councillor Van Dorst.
Thank you, presiding member. I just first want to thank the officers for their assessment on this one and their recommendations, and also very happy to support this one, and also commend the applicant and the project team on in particular the collaborative way you've worked with the city to get from where you were to where you are, and the much improved scheme that we have before us today, and which in my view will offer a significant improvement to the Fremantle streetscape and that site in particular. I'm not sure if the other members have had a chance or to have a look at the site or are familiar with it, but the existing building there, it's set back, it's elevated in the street, it's just never worked, it's never contributed positively to the activation of our main strip of Fremantle. One of the design elements of this I really like is the fact that it's brought down to street level, that the ground floor activation and opportunity for the public interface as well can bring having the cafe there where public can come in, and I think that's will work very well, and I've seen it work well, certainly in the Perth City context. On the issues, I'd also just wanted to note when this was considered at council, just wanted to note the strong support for this. So it was really heartening to see and hear, and we don't hear that often at council. Just for your information, like there was quite a lot of support for this proposal. Just on, I guess, a couple of the main variations, I guess the height, I definitely satisfied and accept the applicant's position and the officer's reporting as well, but just that additional height is really a result of the Western Power transmission, what's it called? Transformer. Yeah, which I understand powers half of Fremantle. Was actually, I don't know if that was mentioned in the introduction, but it is massive and needs to be accommodated onto the site. And just comfortable with the height in its setting and the context. I believe it's consistent with existing heights around and will sit quite nicely in that position in its setting. I think in regards to the parking, which hasn't been brought up, but it's quite a major parking shortfall, if anyone noticed, but just based on number one is this precedent of decisions in Fremantle. So I would, I'm satisfied with the officer reporting, and we have the train station and the high frequency transport around, and also the nature of the use. So I'm happy to support that variation with the parking. I don't really have much to add. I just think it's a great design. It'll be great for Fremantle. Land use and design, everything that ticks all the boxes for me. So thank you.
Thank you. For the speakers. Jessica.
Thank you. I am supportive of the proposal. I'm satisfied that the proposal is consistent with the planning framework. In terms of the proposal in land use, the pod style rooms, from my perspective, hotel rooms, quite a unique development. I'm not familiar in Perth anyway with this type of development. I know it happens around other parts of the world in particular, and I would agree with the comments that have been indicated that style of development supports and encourages activation and use of the public spaces given the limitation of the private spaces within the building. So from my perspective, that is appropriate. The other land uses comprising a bar and a restaurant, accessing via both South Terrace as well as in terms of the bar by the rear lane. And I'm comfortable that both those uses are appropriate in the location of the context. The acoustic report, as I've already raised, identifies quite significant facade glazing as part of its requirements. I do note the comments provided both in terms of pod as well as more traditional hotel style accommodation. And as far as I'm concerned, that has already raised the issues that these matters are quite significant from my perspective on this development in this location, because it reflects this central location or contextual location of being part of an entertainment and an after hours night precinct. And has already been said at today's meeting, the encouragement of community or visitors to the area to also enjoy some of the side streets and the back lanes. So that is quite critical from my perspective. The design, I'm satisfied, activates the site and particularly activates the food offerings in the area facing onto the street, and I'm satisfied with that. The forms and materials, I'm also satisfied that those materials, I'm particularly supportive of the design, which includes both parapet wall as well as the arches. There's been a lot of conversation about the design of the building as it faces the street. From my perspective, I think this design works very well and complements and balances other historic buildings in its local context. I note that it's been assessed by city officers as acceptable. And they've also talked in that sense the graduation of the scale of the building. In terms of parking, that was one that intrigued me. 8 bays provided in lieu of 314 bays with no delivery bay. I find that quite interesting in its location, but I'm satisfied that the material been provided, again, basically on the context of its location, as well as the public transport that's available, the location of public car parks, the substantial location of parking in and around the area, and that it is appropriate for what is sought in these inner areas, and is therefore a variation of that nature in this particular location, given those elements of nature of both the building, the form and type of the hotel type of accommodation, as well as the public transport and the parking in the area. So on balance, I support the proposal. At this junction, I would like to move an amendment, if I may. I'd like to move an amendment. My amendment 1 is to condition 9. And that is to remove the words on the advice of the Design Advisory Committee. And I am moving that motion because the city officers have indicated that they're an internal matter in any case and would be duly considered as part of the appropriate internal mechanisms for assessment of designer materials would occur regardless of whether this is in a condition or not.
Is there a second for that? John, thank you. Any further speakers on that amendment? Stand.
I'll just note that I won't support it because the officers have already told us that no matter whether it's in the condition or it's not in the condition, it would be their view that they're going to likely do that because that's what the policies basically say. So I don't want to give false I guess, hope in a sense to an applicant that it's not going to go back to the Design Advisory Committee just because we take those words out of the motion. So I understand what they're saying. I understand that they don't want to get bogged down in long, tedious conversation and bureaucracy, but the city officers are likely to do it anyway. Whether the applicant has to be there or whether the Design Advisory Committee is just looking at what's proposed, I'll leave that to the staff. It doesn't say they have to do a presentation, but I'll leave that to the staff.
For the speakers on that amendment.
I'll just note that I won't be supporting that one either. I just being a standard condition from the city, I'm happy to support it as worded.
I'm happy to support it because condition 9 is requiring quite a few things going on there, and it might be that the advice might be coming from other than the Design Advisory Committee, whereas everything there has to be on the advice of the Design Advisory Committee. So I think taking it out just opens up that possibility for Chloe to be seeking, as she should do, advice from a whole lot of areas. So back to you, John.
No, you made exactly the points that I was going to make anyway.
Yeah,
So that's
so back to you, Francesca.
No further comments.
No further comment. I'll put the amendment. All in favour? Against? It's carried. 3-2. Thank you. Still with you.
Amendment 2 is to deal with public art, and this is to add the additional point B, which provides and opens the door for consideration of artwork on the building, and as part of the development, not just being contained to the delivery of funds to the council. I'll speak that if I get a second.
Is there a second for that? Yes, John, thank you. Francesca.
My reasons for adding this is that the area is a dynamic area, and there are a lot of opportunities for public art, and I would not like to exclude the opportunity in this prominent location to have the development art to be part of or connected to the development in some way. And that can include or may include the public realm. So from my perspective, I think it's an appropriate, if there's any location that you want good, strong public art, both in this specific location, it would be this site in the entertainment area.
John, second.
Yes, it just provides the city and the applicant with a bit of flexibility, but the city in particular with flexibility as to how the public art might be acted in this case, which I think is appropriate.
Further speakers on this one?
Again, my understanding is that this is automatically part of the artwork policy, that this opportunity exists automatically, but it still is subject to the approval of the City of Fremantle. We're introducing something that is already in the policy. Are we giving a greater expectation that the decision makers of that are to be more influenced by this, or to simply progress an application in the normal way? I have no doubt that there is a very great opportunity for exactly what is suggested in Part B, and that because the laneway almost deserves that, that's a logical way forward. But I don't necessarily believe that it needs to be part of this conditioning, because it's part of the policy.
Further speakers? I think the danger is that the condition is quite explicit in what it wants, a monetary contribution. And you can't then be deferred to a policy and say, we'll take a policy position on this. The other way is to say in the condition that it's monetary contribution or in accordance with the policy. Whereas it doesn't say that. So I'm supporting the amendment. Any further speakers on? No, back to you, Francesca.
I've said everything I want to.
Okay, I'll put the amendment. All in favour? Against? Carried 4-1. Thank you, Steve.
No, I've said everything I want to say.
You've said everything you want to say. Okay. Look, I first of all, I just wanted to ask Chloe, with regard to condition 1, is there any particular reason why that is still in there?
I think that's just a carryover from an old template.
Okay, so that can be removed.
Yeah.
You'll just do it?
No, do it as
No,
an
okay, I'll
addition,
seek a mover. For that, I'll move that to be removed, sorry, and John sign. Because the regs no longer require that to be in there. So I'll put that motion. All in favour? It's unanimous, thank you. Look, just very quickly, I don't want to go through what everyone else has said, but what a fabulous first for Fremantle. I think this is a wonderful, development in a perfect location, the perfect land use, and perfect way of addressing the street. So I'm not going to go into chapter and verse on the scheme and why it should and shouldn't be approved, but I support it wholeheartedly. So back to Councillor Sullivan to wind up the debate. Sorry, back to me first. Speak on. Dear.
Very briefly, I actually remember when the building this is replacing was developed a long time ago. It's never fitted into South Terrace particularly well. It's always been uncomfortable. It's never really good. So being replaced by something like this is very good. I think that the ability to have 193, I think I counted up, rooms or beds in this part of Fremantle, particularly ones which are almost guarantee sort of activation on the street and in the public realm is very, very good for Fremantle. I do particularly like the way that the architecture has been presented, particularly the way it presents to both street faces. It's got a very strong facade, and I think that's to the good of South Terrace. It does do some activation to Essex Lane, which I think is also very important. So I think There's a lot to like about this development, so I think it's worthy of approval. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Mr. Simon. We will now go back to Councillor Sullivan.
I don't really need to say anything. I was worried that we were going to knock down a building that has heritage significance to me, certainly, having had quite a few wines with Dennis Connor on the front alfresco area of that building. And it was built before the America's Cup, and so it does have heritage, but I think hopefully the new building will have a far more positive impact for the city and the people.
Thank you. I'll now put that recommendation as amended. All in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Moving on, there's no forms 2. No SAP reconsiderations. In other business, there's quite a few SAP matters listed there. And the meeting is closed officially at 12:42. Thank you, everybody, for attendance. Thank you to staff. Thank you to the secretary.